Tracy, welcome back to the show.
Thanks a lot. It's nice to be on again.
Yeah, no, it's great to have you back on. The last show was very interesting, and I'm sure this one will be. Looking at your new book, Clock Shavings, I've not had a chance myself to read it, but it looks really, really interesting. I'm definitely going to get stuck into it. Can we have a rundown of what's in the book and what you got up to, and also where you actually got the title from?
Yeah, the title is from God of the Witches by Dr. Margaret Alice Murray, her anthropology book about European witchcraft. It was written in, I think, 1921.
Yeah.
And in there's a quote from some confessions from some Swedish witches, I think in the 1600s. And anyway, it says that, well, I'll have to go get the book, actually. It basically, let's see.
Okay.
Here it is. Yeah, okay. So they're confessing and saying that during their initiation ritual into their witchcraft coven, they were given a, quote, few shavings of a clock to which a stone was tied, and then they threw this into the river, and they had to say, as these shavings of the clock do never return to the clock from which they are taken, so may my soul never return to heaven. So, by using that title, it's sort of a reference to the idea of a Faustian pact, the idea of perhaps endangering your soul by dabbling with witchcraft. Certainly from a Christian perspective, that's what they would have been afraid of, getting involved with witchcraft. And at least the way that the witchcraft covens of Europe are portrayed in God of the Witches from 1920s, they're basically indicating that, yes, they're worshiping and revering this goat god, which is kind of an embodiment of, fertility. But at the same time, it's getting mixed up with what we think of now as Satanism. And I think even back then it may have taken on that tone in that, they're living in a Christian world. So the things that they're doing, even though they had a pre-Christian origin, they're since they're living in a Christian society, they probably also thought of themselves as, embodying the principles of Satanism, at least from the point of view of the people that were ruling their society at the time, right, which were Christians.
Yeah.
So, the book is about my history for the last 13 years dealing with spirits on Ouija boards, talking to them about all sorts of esoteric subjects, everything from biblical subjects to Masonic subjects, talking about the Holy Grail, the pre-Diluvian history of the human race and other races, such as the giants. And, really just all sorts of research that I've done with utilizing the Ouija board and talking to spirits. I call them demonic spirits. Basically as a research tool to further my own writings on the Holy Grail, which I've been doing, since about 1996 when I first started this magazine, Dagobert's Revenge. And I know that last time I was on this show, I mentioned this stuff a little bit, and I said that I was going to write a book about it, and a few months later, that's actually what I did.
That's right. Yeah, I was just thinking. I remember. I think it was David asked you what your own experience with the occult was, and you kind of said, "It's funny you should say that." So, so it is interesting. Here you are back with the book. You've actually got your own order. Is that right? The Order Lapsit Exilis.
Yeah, I mean it's shut down now, but that's what we were doing back then. We had this group called Ordo Lapsit Exilis, and it actually existed before I ever used a Ouija board. It was just something that was the title for the group of people that I was working with Dagobert's Revenge magazine and the research that we were doing for the articles in that magazine. Also, I eventually wrote some books, and at the time, some of the people I was working with, we were supposed to write some books together. We were writing books together. So anyway, yeah, we were doing all this esoteric research and coming up with some unique things at the time, things that other people hadn't, I guess, discovered or connected yet in terms of the history related to the Holy Grail and I guess the origins of Freemasonry. So we were doing all this research, and one day, we were looking into the Priory of Zion too. Back then, this is before Da Vinci Code, right? 13 years ago, just a couple years before it came out. So it wasn't as, I guess, popular of a subject, and had the public perception of it hadn't been tainted yet by this Hollywood movie. And we were trying to get to what, if anything, is the truth behind this story of the Priory of Zion, the alleged the treasure supposedly and mystery that surrounds this village in France, Rennes-le-Château, which is connected to the mysteries of the Priory of Zion. And then this bloodline that's mentioned in Da Vinci Code, this bloodline of the Merovingians and other royal houses of Europe as well, which previous authors had suggested the reason why there's sort of a cult of this bloodline and secret societies devoted to bringing about its, resurgence in politics.
Yeah.
The reason why that is, they theorized, was because they thought the bloodline may have come from Jesus and Mary Magdalene. And so in our research, we were not necessarily discounting that, but just tracing it back further and saying, perhaps the significance of the bloodline and even the significance of Jesus's blood in a way was that, they were related to this older sacred bloodline, which you can find traces of and myths about in all different cultures. Basically indicating, the myths basically indicate that the origin of this bloodline is superhuman, and perhaps it's the same concept that's alluded to in the Bible in Genesis when it talks about the sons of God or the angels coming down from heaven and breeding with human women, and that the product of that were giants and sort of deformed people, and monsters really, that sort of ravaged the earth. But they were kings, as it says in Genesis, men of renown. And their sort of reign of terror on earth supposedly was ended by the flood. That's the reason why God brought about the flood, was to stop the giant race. So this is the kind of research we were doing 13 years ago, publishing a magazine about it, preparing to write a book about it. And excuse me. So my husband, or future husband, one of the guys I was working with, was Brian Albert, and we had just moved in together in Denver. And as he was unpacking his stuff, one of the things he unpacked was a Ouija board. And this was late at night, probably July, I think, of 2001. And so we just got this idea that we should contact Jean Cocteau with the Ouija board. Jean Cocteau, the French artist and poet, filmmaker,
right,
supposedly was connected to the Priory of Zion. And Holy Blood, Holy Grail, which was written in the 80s, they had connected him to the Priory of Zion. The Priory's own magazines and publications that they had put out claimed that Jean Cocteau had been a member. And really, his life was contemporary with these publications by the Priory. They were putting magazines out claiming that he was a member, basically at the time that he was still alive. So of all of the claims that have been made about the Priory of Zion, and supposedly going back to the Knights Templar, connecting this order to, lots of historical people, important historical people, I thought that the claim connecting the Priory to Jean Cocteau was probably the most valid of all of them. And that if nothing else, it might have been a modern organization really started by Jean Cocteau and some of his friends, that maybe he was, an initiate of a secret society, and that the Priory of Zion and its publications are the public face of that. So one of the things I knew about Jean Cocteau was that he had been involved in several forms of divination at one point in his life, including table rapping. He and Victor Hugo's wife, and some of the other characters that he used to hang out with there in Paris, they would get together sometimes and do these seances, table rapping sessions. And he had been really influenced by that. In fact, you can see it in the film Orpheus, which is all about a poet who's inspired by mysterious messages coming through the radio. And it turns out that the messages are coming from the underworld. And he ends up going to the underworld and falling in love with death, and like a woman who embodies death. Anyway, the point is just we felt that John Cocteau, had taken this divination concept very seriously himself. So maybe we should take it seriously, and maybe we should try to talk to him. Maybe now that he's dead, he would be willing to participate in such a thing with us. So that's what we did. We started doing that, and that very night we contacted him and got a response almost pretty much right away. And we were encouraged by that. We got some messages that were somewhat useful, but mainly indicating that he was having a hard time communicating and that we should talk to some other character. And it took us, we actually did like several sessions trying to figure out what Jean Cocteau was really trying to say. Because some of it was like misspelled, some of it was in French, and a lot of it was metaphorical. But one of the things he kept saying was, see the sun, or talk to BS. And it turned out what he was talking about was Cain. He was identifying Cain from the Bible with the symbol of the black sun, the esoteric symbol of the black sun, which you find in alchemy, and the Nazis were obsessed with the symbol of the black sun. It's the idea that there's this black sun in the center of the earth. And there's stories about a civilization down there with using this black sun as their source of light. So at that point, we decided, go ahead and do what he was saying. Talk to the sun. And that's when we really got very useful messages. And really, it influenced everything I and the Ordo Lapsit Exilis people were doing for months and years afterwards. Cain gave us all sorts of useful information. Eventually, he turned us on to Baphomet as well, who gave us even more useful information. And so I kept transcripts of all this stuff. It was a springboard for a lot of the articles that I wrote, and eventually the books that I wrote. And so years later, 13 years later, I decided to look back and gather up all of my transcripts and try to analyze this stuff from my perspective now. I mean, you can find, since I said it, it influenced my writing, so you can look back through the books that I've written, and you can see where some of these ideas came from, or how I started researching a particular line of interest. But I hadn't really told anyone about the Ouija board connection, the spiritual connection, and I hadn't really looked back. So I decided to do that this year. And the end result is Clock Shavings, the book.
Right. Yeah, obviously, Ouija boards, it's got kind of a spooky thing about it, and a lot of people think they're very dangerous and so on. Were you experienced when you'd done it? Obviously, the group that around you that was doing it, how did you go about doing the Ouija board? Was it new to you at the time, or were you with a bunch of people that, very much knew what they were doing? Was it a shock when it worked?
Well, it went before, really, and had it work. I suppose I'd tried a couple of times as a teenager at parties, but neither of us, mainly Brian and I, are the ones that started it. Neither of us really taken it that seriously or thought about it much before that night. It was just a spur of the moment thing, and I think Brian was kind of surprised that it worked. But I don't know. To me, it just felt normal, like I was expecting that, and that kind of carried forth through the whole process, and all the sessions that came later. There'd be some element of surprise or being impressed at how well it was working. Whenever we would get a really coherent message, especially something that was about something I didn't already know, there's always an element of, oh wow, that's cool, but strangely, I'm actually surprised by this, that I didn't feel that much shock, and there was no fear at all the entire time. And even it got really kind of weird, years into it, we talked to Satan for a while. We were dealing with some really dark things talking to Satan, and yet even then, I didn't get scared. It was like almost as if some sort of force came over me and carried me through it. It was like I was watching it, from a distance, I guess.
Was it just the two of you doing it? Was it?
Well, mostly, but no, we had other people involved. Several of the sessions, and especially we would usually try to get someone to act as a scribe, and a lot of times we were all trading that role back and forth. I mean, we would, you'd have maybe a group of 3 people or 3 or 4 people, and throughout the night, different people's hands would be on the planchette. One person would take a turn being the scribe, and then the person who was previously the scribe would start, being one of the people doing the divining on the planchette. What's interesting about that really is that even with totally different people's hands on the planchette, you would still get a continuation of the conversation. The same types of very obscure references would come out. There's been consistency over the years with the types of references that we get from talking to Cain and Baphomet. Really obscure, very specific, very esoteric code words and phrases and complicated layers of symbolism and ideas. And the conversation is just carried forth almost seamlessly for 13 years now, even when I'm like standing there in the room and complete strangers or people I've just met are using the board in front of me. I can talk to Baphomet or Cain, and these other people who are using the Ouija board will get the same kinds of messages. So this everything that's happened is really, not that I had any doubt from the beginning. I knew I wasn't faking it, but I really don't have any doubt that it is what it seems to be. Really,
yeah.
It is. You're talking to these spirits. They're giving you stuff from their own intelligence. They're not. It's not something you're projecting, and it's not something. Certainly, I'm not. The people that I've been involved in and all involved with, and me, we're not faking it. But not only that, there's theories that some people put forth that it's a projection of your subconscious. You're sort of self-hypnotizing, and you don't really realize you're doing it, but you're actually just saying things that were sort of locked in your own mind somewhere. I don't think that's true, because honestly, these are things that weren't in my mind. A lot of them, things that I didn't know before. I mean, I would get messages related to what I was asking about, and a lot of times things that were tailor-made for me, like I wouldn't, there's no way I would have understood some of these things if I hadn't already had quite a lot of experience reading books about esoteric subjects, secret societies, and Freemasonry and stuff like that. But, I mean, as far as the details of some of the answers, is definitely stuff that I wouldn't have known. And I just have no doubt that this is a real communication.
Yeah. Well, I mean, there's also the risk with this kind of stuff that maybe it could have indeed been a genuine spirit, but who's to say that spirits don't know how to pull your leg as well? To sort of say, let's wind these people up, let's give them something. Did you have any consideration maybe that could have been afoot, or any sort of prankster entities sort of trying to mess around with you guys?
Well, I get that question a lot, and basically I just think, I'm interviewing someone the same way I've done lots of radio interviews. I've been on one side and the other on the radio. I've interviewed other people too as the host of shows, and you don't know, you can't see their facial expressions, and most of the time you just don't have the time to follow up on everything they're saying. You're just getting information from their perspective, and so this is the way I see it. It's journalistic research in a way, and you're talking to someone, getting the information they have to share, and then of course it's your job afterwards to try to analyze it and verify what you can, and you don't take everything at face value. And certainly what we call demonic spirits, and they did reveal themselves to be anti-Christian for sure. You would think that you don't want to necessarily take what they say at face value for sure. Which I didn't, and I did catch him I caught him lying several times and being wrong several times. I mean, both Cain and Baphomet. But at the same time, it seems to me at least as valuable, in fact, way more valuable than so many of the other interviews I've done with humans. Uh, that seems so interesting at the time, and yet when you follow it up, maybe not all of it is true. Or, everyone has their own perspective, for one thing. Everyone lies. Everyone tries to present things in the best possible light for themselves. Everyone has an agenda, so that's what it is. It's just an interview with a spirit. Of course, I can't see them, and you can't see them, just because of the nature of the type of communication. But other than that, you have all the same indications of who it is and what level of truth they're giving as any other person you would talk to.
Yeah. One point I'd like to address is the Black Sun, because I know there is an order of the Black Sun that's out there now, an occult group. So could you tell us a little bit about that? Is the Black Sun that you were being talked to about via the Ouija board, is that got any association with the Order of the Black Sun that's out around today? Do you think?
I don't know. In a way, I think that these spirits are inspirations for these occult groups. In other words, I think that if you create an occult order and you put, say, the Black Sun as your mascot, chances are you can make a connection, or you already have, and that's what inspired you to do that, So, and I think the same with Baphomet, like you can tell which occult groups, which orders are connected to him and have him as their outer head. You can just see the symbolism of him throughout all of the things that they do, and you can say, hey, there's another Baphometic order. And so, that's all I know for sure. Now, the Black Sun that Cain was talking about, he told us a little bit about it and why he would be identified with that symbol. He said that he was in the center of the earth. We asked him, and he said yes. And then he sort of described the situation he was in. He said that he was locked inside of a prism, Prism, that was also a prison, Prison, was in jail, he said. That he had been put there by God. He said that it had happened after the flood, which he said he was responsible for, that he had caused the flood, the deluge of the Bible, and that he had caused it. Basically, he told this long story about the fall of Eden, as he called it, which he said was the same as the fall of Atlantis. That there was this kingdom or empire in the past that Eden was this seat of, like the throne of Adam, as he described it, was the what do you call it? The place where the rulership of this whole kingdom, and in fact empire, as he described it, was centered at. And so he was the rightful heir to the throne of Adam. And he said also that the throne of Adam was associated with this thing called the Ark, or the one box of things. He said it contained this transcendental power, and he identified it as being the same as the Grail stone and the Philosopher's Stone, that inside of the Ark there was this transcendental power. That's what was sort of the relic, or the I guess the foundation stone of this kingdom, Eden, and having control over this Ark is what would give someone sort of worldly power. You would be the rightful king of the world if you had control over the Ark and the throne of Adam, he said. And so he was going to be the heir to that. But there was a rebellion in these colony countries, as he called them. He said that there were these tributary nations that were part of this empire of Eden, or Atlantis, and they were ruled over by people who were actually his descendants. I don't know if they're people even, beings that were his descendants. And he said there was a rebellion. They were trying to get the throne of Adam and the Ark. And he was so angry about that. Well, they ended up having a war. He said it was a war fought by swords and axes. And in the end, he got so disgusted with the whole situation that he did some sort of magic ritual, essentially, or an alchemical process that created a big destruction on Earth. And this caused the flood. He said this is what caused Eden to collapse beneath the waves. The majority of Eden, he said, collapsed. And then, of course, there was a part of it that didn't, that contained, I think, this ark, this treasure. So that got preserved somewhere, but the rest of Eden collapsed. And as part of the same process of the fall of Eden, or the fall of Atlantis, the Cainites, Cain and his descendants, and also his cohorts, the people who were fighting the war on his behalf, all of these characters were cast down into the abyss, into this realm in the underworld that he said he was still speaking from. So he said that down in the abyss where he's at now, he's in this prison that's also a prism, and that there's some sort of energy or light radiating through that causes this effect that's called the black sun. There's some sort of energy basically coming from his prison, the place that he's at, and it radiates throughout the whole underworld, and that this is like the source of their illumination. This is how they are able to navigate in the underworld, where it's otherwise completely dark, foggy, and impenetrable. And then he said that he's not really alive. He's kind of asleep and undead, I guess, like a vampire. And you could tell that, too, from the way he was talking to us. He would sort of fade in and out of consciousness in a way. And sometimes his sentences would trail off into nonsense, and we would have to sort of goad him to get him to talk sense again. And he also actually, the first thing he said when we first talked to him is he complained. He's asked, "Why are you bidding on me?" So he was almost like bothered that we were disturbing his rest, I guess. But anyway, so you could think of the place where he's at as it's not only the place where the sun resides, the black sun. I mean, he is the source of the black sun, but it's also it's a prison, and it's a coffin in a way. So yeah, that's what Cain told us about himself, and that's, I guess, what the symbol of the black sun means to him. And then there's references to the black sun throughout the sessions that we had for years to come. It appears to be an important thing to them.
Okay, well, Mr. Parry, I think it's time for you to chime in with this one.
What incredibly interesting material. I mean, I'm trying to avoid the endless fireworks going off behind me. So if you hear sudden explosions or me choking, yes, I'm getting the cold that's going around London at the minute, but it's not me exploding anything, it's fireworks. I'm a nice white light boy. Some of this worries me. Jean Cocteau, what an amazingly talented man. I seem to remember in The Holy Blood and the Holy Grail, the writers said he was the present Grand Master of the Priory of Zion. And certainly he's the artist for a mural in a French church, as far as memory serves me, Notre Dame de France, which is off Leicester Square.
Yep.
Where he painted a black sun. Yes, a beautiful, beautiful painting, Tracy. And
you'll notice on that mural, okay, there's all these people. Of course, he's depicting the moment when Christ died, and it says in the Gospels that the sun turned black at that moment. Mm-hmm. But you see all these people with their eyeballs kind of poking out of their heads almost, and they're all staring up directly at that sun. Yeah. And what Cocteau kept telling us was, see the sun. He would go to the letter C, and then, on a Parker Brothers Ouija board, on the left there, on the top left, there's always a sun symbol. So we kept going to the letter C and the sun symbol over and over again, and we decoded finally, after asking him repeatedly, that was a reference to the black sun. And we also asked, does this have anything to do with your mural in Leicester Square? And he said, yes, that was sort of a confession of the secrets that he knew back when he was alive about the Black Sun.
Incredibly interesting. I mean, certainly I've taken part in some white magic rituals. One of the central concerns, apart from protection, obviously, was testing the spirits we were talking to. I mean, did you feel that was necessary in your own work?
Well, basically, it was what we did in terms of testing was just if it wasn't going anywhere, if he wasn't really giving us an answer, whoever we were talking to, we would just sort of demand that they speak English and say something that makes sense and tell us the actual answer that we're looking for. But, I don't know. We didn't find that we could necessarily force the situation. Like sometimes they were just uncooperative and you would have to go on to another topic. So, like I said, to your colleague there, we didn't have any experience really with divination. And what has happened to me over the years is I've learned what I know about not only divination, but magic and specifically ritual magic and how to do it from these spirits, which may not be the way that's recommended to do it, but it's just what ended up happening. We had conversations, we were given information, mostly about historical stuff, research we were doing, but there were times when we wanted to know we just asked personal questions really and figured that these spirits, from their perspective, they might have some sort of insight that we don't have. And that's how we ended up getting advice basically about how to alter reality by doing rituals. And also we were told about curses we supposedly had on us and how they came about and how to get rid of them. So it was I think to me, it's sort of been like a Sholomance experience. How Bram Stoker talks about the Sholomance, this school taught by the devil, and 13 students every year would go there, and only one of them would graduate, and they would learn how to do magic directly from the devil. And that's kind of what happened to us. I mean, we learned magic from the spirits, including Baphomet, who, at least in modern public consciousness, is thought of as being synonymous with the devil.
I'll get back to that one in a minute. I mean, when I first read The Holy Blood and the Holy Grail, what concerned me was the obvious link with French nationalism. Certainly wasn't hidden in the book, which made me very, very uneasy indeed. And basically two other things. Isn't the time for monarchies over? I mean, good Lord, haven't we all had enough of them? And I'm speaking as a Brit. The Priory of Zion, if I'm being cynical, even when it had an army, couldn't hold on to Jerusalem. And if they're trying to bring back a monarchy, no matter who or what bloodline it's through, can't we all grow up as a species and have a healthy democracy?
Well, I don't think that we're talking about modern human governments here. I think that we're talking to a spirit. We were talking to spirits that are very much connected to the Christian eschaton. They have an interest in, whether it's true or not, they talk about the end of the world from a perspective that matches up very much with what's in the book of Revelation in the Bible. And that came up, when you look at the book, you'll see there are whole sessions that we had on that. And I didn't go looking for that. That was told to us. In fact, John Cocteau mentioned it actually in the first session. We were asking him about that painting in Leicester Square. We asked about there's a cross and a blue rose at the bottom of it in that painting. We were asking, what's the meaning of that? And he said, NWO 666. And I was,
oh my God.
I remember saying at the time, like, okay, they didn't even talk about the New World Order and the connection to the supposed Antichrist back when Cocteau was around. So I just thought it was very strange that he would bring that up. But then later on, it started to make more sense when Baphomet started talking about the Antichrist and the apocalypse and things like that. Well, and I don't know, I'm not saying any of this is necessarily true, but again, the spirit wanted to talk about it with us, and managed to make connections with all sorts of details related to the Holy Grail subjects we were researching. So when we're talking about bringing back kings on Earth, I think that what would have to happen between now and then is so severe. You won't be asking that question at this point. You won't be concerned about democracy. The situation is going to be so different at that point. And what he was really describing, what he ended up telling us about, really was this idea that there's these demons in the underworld, trapped there, imprisoned by the one true God, whatever that means to you, and they want out, and they are manipulating basically their human servants, the people that are involved in secret societies and are talking to them. They are using these people to do certain things, make certain changes on Earth that will somehow allow them to come out. And then all the stuff that's talked about in Revelation starts to happen. And the way they described it, they see it as a merging of two worlds, really. Like when the portal opens basically to the underworld and they're allowed to come out, that moment is this monumental change in our universe, basically. It's synonymous with, if you're familiar with this sort of archetype that you find in several different cultures, myths. They talk about this idea of the world axis, a world mountain, a pole that holds up the heavens from the earth, and also there's the bowels of this mountain really reach down into the underworld. So it's this mountain that sort of connects all of the different realms of existence. And there's this myth about, what if the demons in the bottom part, in the underworld, are able to collapse the pole somehow, and that opens up their portal and lets them out, but it also sort of merges all of these worlds together. And that's what Baphomet ended up talking to us about. And we've even gotten messages about that recently, because I've still been doing this with my friends even in the last couple of months. And they're talking about this monumental change that they want to bring about, that from our perspective might seem like basically the end of time itself. Time as we experience it would be quite different if the worlds were merged all of a sudden like that. And so all this stuff about a king, an antichrist king ruling the earth, at that, we're talking about a different thing than just someone coming to power over the nations of the earth that we have now. I think that we're talking about, well, the way it was described to me actually was someone who is a physical descendant of these demons, going through a ritual that would, where he's supposedly enthroned as the king of the earth. And during that ritual, he would be killed and, sacrificed, basically. And as he's sacrificed, his body would become possessed by Baphomet. And then he would rule, basically, as this Antichrist figure. But he's more of like a sacred king, really, than a political king, the way we would think of him now. He's someone who has a position that has an important magical effect, as a connector between the worlds, and a portal, really. I mean, it's almost like he himself could be the portal that opens this whole thing up.
Well, certainly a friend of this show, the Reverend Jim Wilhelmsen, would describe himself as a monarchist, and I know Chuck Missler does. That's interesting. I've had dealings with the Nephilim. They destroyed one of my conferences last year.
Really?
No, I'm suing them. Oh, gosh, Cain and Baphomet. I mean, Cain, if we're looking at him biblically, of course, was the first murderer. I thought Baphomet was more of a formula than an actual entity. What do you think of that, Tracy?
Seemed like an entity to me, and I didn't, again, ask for him to show up. We were told, when we were talking to Cain, we were told that some of the blockages we had been experiencing in our personal lives were caused by a curse that had been put on us. So we asked who put the curse on us, and he said Baphomet, and that we needed to talk to Baphomet to find out more. In fact, he said the reason why we were being cursed was our failure to acknowledge Baphomet. He used that term, acknowledge Baphomet. When you go on YouTube, you can find a video with that title, which is just some of the video we took of that session. Interestingly, he told us that the way to acknowledge Baphomet and the way to alleviate the curse was to publish this book that I had promised a friend of mine I would publish. The guy's name was Nicholas de Vere. He's one of your countrymen from Britain. And he had written a book about this bloodline that I'm talking about, you know, going back to the Nephilim and really what he called the dragon. You know, he had no problem saying it was a satanic bloodline. He was saying that, you know, Satan and all of these sort of demonic characters from the Christian worldview were really ancestors to a lot of royal families on Earth now, and he's considered himself to be one of them. So he wrote this whole book about his family history, and I was friends with him, and I had promised him I would help him publish this book, but then I had forgotten all about it and just wasn't concerned about it at all. It had been months since I had talked to him, and then all of a sudden here on the board, I was told that the reason why I was being cursed, the reason why Baphomet thought I was not acknowledging him or her really, was that I had failed to publish this book. I mean, first I was told, you know, I asked, how do you acknowledge Baphomet? And he said, publish a book. And I said, what book? Because I was working on 2 books at the time, you know. And then they said, Nicholas de Vere. And at the time I was annoyed. I thought, what about my book, the book I'm working on? But the Spirit had an interest in this particular other book by Nicholas de Vere. And so I said, why do you care about Nicholas de Vere's book? Or why does Baphomet care? I'm talking to Kane at the moment. And I said, why does Baphomet care? And he said, because she is related. So he was affirming what Nicholas de Vere was saying in his books, kind of identifying Baphomet as a someone that one could consider an ancestor somehow. You know, so apparently there has been at some point in the past, at least that's what the spirits are indicating, in the past there was some way in which they could physically interact with humans and actually breed bloodlines with them.
Oh, gosh, Tracy, that's fascinating. Let me, just before I get pulled back in, mention my one other concern in all this. I mean, my trouble with demons is they all live in hell, not a nice place to go. Dennis Wheatley, of course, he wrote much more about non-occult subjects than occult novels. But I remember him being interviewed, I think it was the BBC, years back, and saying, well, he'd always choose the light because in the light things prospered and grew stronger, whereas in the dark everything withered and perished. I'm hearing lots of moral relativism. I'm hearing relativism leading towards a darkness. That doesn't strike me like you as a person at all. So I wonder, do you feel conflicted by this information? Do you feel it's simply reportage that you're following as a writer? I mean, what's your basic view of the line all this is taking?
Yeah, I mean, I would say that in the past I got a bit more personally involved in it than I would now. You know, got kind of sucked into the point of view that Baphomet was giving us. We had personal relationship with him. He had basically a leadership role in Ordo Lapsit Exilis, our secret society. And, you know, so it was a different relationship back then. At a certain point, several years into that, I just basically broke it off for a while. For a couple of years, I wasn't doing any Ouija board or talking to these spirits because it got to the point where I found myself doing all sorts of projects and being heavily laden with work that doesn't seem to be benefiting me at all. But it was mainly stuff that, the spirits had encouraged me and my friends to take on all these projects and stuff. And I felt burdened by it. and burdened by the whole relationship that I had with these spirits. I just thought, it seems like they're pushing me around. How did I become a slave to this somehow,
Mm-hmm.
And so I, didn't talk to them for a couple years. And when I finally came back to it, it was just different. It was, more just getting information, not trying to direct a secret society, not doing magic rituals with them. None of that stuff. Just, I just decided at some point to go back to it and pick up the conversations.
Yeah.
And learn more information. But at this point, I'm just basically reporting what they say.
I'm going to be very cheeky, Paul. Forgive me. Let me ask one last thing. Have you done what you would consider ritual workings, Tracy?
Yes, I would say that.
Would you care to explain their nature, or do you think that's privileged information?
Well, there's some of it in the book. I've done a variety of different things. The stuff that we were encouraged to do and taught to do by these spirits, that what's talked about in the book, almost all of it was cursing other people. So, it wasn't, when I look back on it, it's like, well, why didn't we try to do nice stuff and make nice things happen? And I don't know. We were sucked into something that was going on at the time. A lot of, occult group infighting that was happening. I was a member of a couple of other groups as well. And then there were other groups that I wasn't a member of, and I didn't even know these people, but for some reason they had a vendetta against me. Oh. So I ended up having like fights with people online and stuff. Mm-hmm. And that's what's got me into trying to fight back with magic. We were told, oh, they've cursed you. You need to curse them back. And got involved in that stuff, but it never really went anywhere. It didn't seem to benefit us at all. It didn't seem to hurt the other people very much at all either. So it was just kind of a big waste of time.
Absolutely fascinating. Young Paul.
You're right there. Yeah, no, it's very interesting stuff. Just wanted to add when you said, "Oh, demons are from hell." I think there's sometimes you've got to be careful, because if you are channeling beings that have obviously been around for quite a while, there was a time when the word demon wasn't actually such a bad thing. I think we covered that on an Anthony Peake show once, when we concluded that the word demon was actually demonized in more recent years.
That's a confusion. The Greek daimon means creative force, whereas demon comes from a Semitic root meaning negative energy. So that's actually a bit of a confusion.
I'll look into that one a bit further, Mr. Parry.
It's all there in the textbooks. I'm saying nothing anyone would disagree with.
But one of the things I'd like to mention is that Satanist side of stuff. I mean, looking at Baphomet, from the church point of view, obviously, Baphomet, he's the devil, he's Satan, he's evil. But you get like a lot of Satanists that actually are members of the Church of Satan, who will view themselves as innocent as most in certain areas. I know it's quite controversial, but they'll claim their innocence, and fair play to them. But and also a lot of occultists out there take a lot of inspiration from Baphomet. They work magic. Working with him in some way or form. I don't know a great deal about him, if I'm honest, but what do you think? I mean, are these guys dealing with something they should not be? What are your views on Baphomet as an entity in itself? Do you see him as an evil entity now, or how do you see that?
No, I think, it's very multi-layered, so Baphomet, the way I see it, is sort of a mascot or embodiment of the science of alchemy also. And this is what Eliphas Levi wrote about him. He kind of said that he's basically the transformative force in a magic ritual. He's the power that makes it change one thing to another. And he's, you could identify with him with the universal agent of alchemy too. And that might even be why he's shown with this caduceus rising up out of his nether regions when he's shown as a goat-headed figure. You see the caduceus, the two serpents on it, symbolizing alchemy, and also the role of Mercury or Hermes as kind of a scribe and a teacher. That's the way I see Baphomet, as like this teacher of magic. and he's getting connected to the witchcraft goat god and connected to the goaty figure of Satan. And I don't think that these things are, I think all these things are connected. These are all a part of him. But to me, it's just such a much more multifaceted symbol. And I don't mean to just reduce him to a symbol either, because to me, it's an intelligence as well. Mm. So to say it's Satan is just to make it so smaller than what it really is. I think it's a much larger concept. And so to me, I have no problem saying I think that this is basically the mascot and the outer head of Freemasonry. And I know that there's lots of Freemasons that, never use the word Baphomet and would be annoyed to be associated with that. But in reality, you find lots of connections there in Masonic ritual with goat symbolism. And, there's this sort of initiation ritual involving riding the goat, as they call it. So I think that these are all sort of references, homages to the Templars, and I think there is a spiritual connection and otherwise historic connection between the Templars and Masons. And really, I think that the Templars seem to be sort of ground zero for Western occultism. So many of the Western occult groups will connect themselves somehow to the Templars, and it's not just because they're looking for some sort of legitimation of themselves and their tradition, but also I think that that's who's inspiring them. And if they're actually connecting with him the way that we were, then it's a legitimate connection to say your group is somehow continuing the tradition of the Templars. Well, if you're talking to Baphomet, which is what the Templars were doing, they had this head or skull, which for them was a touch point and a way of receiving these inspired prophecies and utterances from Baphomet. I think that they were doing the same thing I was doing, just I had a Ouija board, they were talking to a head. But there's this word called teraphim, if you've ever seen it. It's mentioned in the Bible a few times, and it's really a word for this like Middle Eastern practice of taking the severed head of a baby. It doesn't have to be a baby; it could be anything. But there's a lot of it. A lot of times, it was a baby head. Taking a severed head and embalming it and mounting it on a plate, and then using that for divination. A lot of times, they would put magical words on a piece of paper and stick it in the mouth of the head, and then use that for divination. So I think that's probably what the Templars were doing, and I think that sort of started that started a magical stream, I guess, a current that all of these occult groups ever since have been feeding from and connecting themselves to.
Okay, well, one book that comes to mind with a lot of this stuff, I always bring this guy up because I think he's an underrated writer, and his books I think are really good. There's a guy called William Walker Atkinson. I think he was one of the leaders from the Rosicrucians way back years ago, and he had a book called, I think it was Human Aura, Astral Colours and Thought Forms or something like that, but he went into astral world and spirits that you communicate with them, and I think it's quite, it reminds me of some of this stuff because he's talked about that there are actual beings that died and went into the astral. There's beings that were born in the astral, but he also mentioned there's also beings that are actually created by human consciousness. So it tied a little bit to what you said at the start when you said, "Are you sure friends aren't saying, oh, was this just in your mind?" It was like, well, even if that was the case, it doesn't mean it's not relevant. You know what I mean? Because it's like your human collections. I mean, you get a lot of people that say, "Oh, I saw Jesus. Jesus came to me in a dream," or "I saw him standing there," and that could very well be the case because obviously so many people believe in Jesus. That in itself can create an entity called Jesus. You know, it's quite an interesting book. I don't know if any of the listeners want to check that book out as well. But it's I thought I'd bring that up. Have you heard of him before or that theory?
Well, I haven't heard what he had to say about it, but I mean that is a real thing. That's a tradition you can find in from a lot of different writers and You find hints of it in scripture even. And basically that is kind of what I think has happened with Baphomet, where I think that the people who started it, probably those first 9 knights, they were tapping into something that was older than Christianity and is probably, you could connect it to, I think, the Jewish demons, the demons that Jewish Kabbalists talk about, Samael and Lilith, which were, they say, both part of a hermaphroditic being, a serpent that was hermaphroditic, and they said that this is the serpent in the Garden of Eden. And so they even have stories about how basically Eve bred a demonic race with the male half, Samael, and Adam bred a demonic race with Lilith. And the product of Eve's dalliances with the serpent would have been Cain, according to the Kabbalists. So that would explain why we tapped into Cain so easily and why Cain wanted us to talk to Baphomet. And then, I think that this symbol of Baphomet as this hermaphroditic being connects to this image of the hermaphroditic demon Lilith Samael, and they even combine all of these things sometime. I think, let's see, what's this guy's name? Stanislas de Guarita or something like that. There's an occultist who put out books talking about Baphomet. This is after Levi, but he added to the concept a little bit and put some sigils in his books for Baphomet that included references to Lilith and Samael and also Leviathan. And to me, so I think that these are all connected concepts, demons that are related literally by, familial relationships. And that as the generations continue, I think you could think of it sort of as an egregore, like it's a concept that grows over time, and it also feeds into the reality of this demonic spirit or intelligence. So it is all of these things combined in a way. And I think that the Templars probably tapped into that stream, that ethos, and added to it. So to them, the skull that they were talking to, they like to symbolize it as the skull of John the Baptist. And John the Baptist was their patron saint. And I think that they probably thought that that's what their main Baphomet skull was. And then, of course, there were little versions of it, other like replicas of the head that were found in other Templar preceptories. So it seems like, they probably had one main idol, and then some of the other groups had other, their own versions of it that allowed them to tap into it too. But yeah, I think that they basically added to the idea, and it became this Baphomet thing. And then after they sort of solidified the idea, then it got passed on through the generations to these other groups and became even more. They merged it with the goat symbolism, which you can connect not only to the European goat god, but also to Azazel in the Bible, the goat demon. And, and then all this alchemical stuff got mixed in. And so now you have Baphomet being this very complex symbol. It means a lot of things to a lot of people, but is undeniably at the heart of so many of these, modern occult concepts now.
Yeah, no, that's is interesting stuff. We are pressing on towards the end now. In fact, we're very close to the end. David, have you got anything you'd like to add quickly before we wrap it up?
Oh gosh, I mean, I could talk to Tracy for hours anyway. You both know that. I think she's an engaging writer. She's a wonderfully gifted orator.
I agree.
I'm still troubled by all of this. What has the daimon of Socrates to do with the devils of Loudun? I think absolutely nothing. Albert Pike keeps coming to my mind for the simple reason that's a very gifted writer, of course, but a contradictory man. Your personal view, Tracy. How can Jesus Christ be part of a demonic bloodline?
Well, in that, I think any human could be part of it. And certainly, I think you're going to find, if this concept is true, which I'm kind of inclined to think that it is, that the injection of the serpent spirit into human blood was the main injection, from beyond into humanity. And so you're going to find so many important people throughout history connected to it because they have, something more than human in their bloodstream somehow. And so I think that's the origin really of this idea of a sacred king. And I think that, at least there could be traditions that Jesus was part of that. And to me, it doesn't seem unbelievable at all. I mean, I think that the idea of something sacred really just means something supernatural. And I think that when you look at the etymology, even in Latin and in some other languages as well, you'll find that those words connected to sacred or holy, they just mean it's something that sticks out above normal reality, So I think that this bloodline is something that comes from something beyond, and the people that come from that bloodline are themselves something from beyond a little bit. That's why they're going to make an impression on history. That's why they're going to be important kings, important religious figures, and that this is the source of. We're talking about a stream of holiness, basically coming from beyond, and then I guess the value judgment that you choose to put on that is your own. And I think that that's really what this whole conversation is. The reason why it's been so difficult, and why so many of the conversations I've had about this subject have been difficult, is because we just keep trying to judge these really old concepts from our modern perspective with our modern morality, and you just can't, because that's not where these things come from. They come from a place that pre-exists the morality that we have invented in modern times.
Challenging, exciting, and extremely novel. Paul, that's me done for today.
Yep, I think that does wrap it up. Unfortunately, TracyTwyman.com, and the new book is Clock Shavings. Is there anything else you'd like to let our listeners know about, Tracy?
Well, I think you're going to enjoy this book. Actually, the first half of it, I would say, the first 2/3 of it are the story of how we went through this process, all the different divination sessions that we've done. And then the last third of it is the analysis. And I think that's what you're really going to be interested in, really decoding a lot of religious symbolism and even these stories about the apocalypse, supposedly. I think your readers are going to be very interested in it. So
it's been great speaking to you again, and we'll hopefully do it again soon.
All right. Thank you.
Tracy, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me on, Freeman. It's good to be on the show again.
Yeah, it's great to have you. I feel that we have become good friends now, and I know this is going to be an enlightening discussion.
I hope so.
Well, let's get to it then. Shall we begin there at the dawn of Friday the 13th, 1307, and work our way up, or what works best for you in this topic?
Well, I suppose, we could start there with the Templars, which I feel like at this point a lot of people kind of know what they are, so I won't belabor the point too much. But, just in case you don't, the Templars were this order of monks. It was created in the late 1000s, early 1100s, and they basically were supposedly there to protect pilgrims going to the Holy Land. That's what they said their reason to exist was. They were actually created right there on what was supposedly the Temple Mount of Solomon's Temple. There's a mosque there. There was back then too, and they stayed in that area. They had their headquarters there. And then, of course, the Crusades began, and they became one of the sort of like the special forces. They were one of the elite forces in the Crusades.
They had begun with simply 9 knights in the beginning,
exactly,
claiming to be able to champion all the pilgrims with simply 9 knights prior to this conquest. Go ahead, sorry.
Yeah, no, exactly. That's one of the sort of historical mysteries of the Templars is, they started with 9 knights. They had this mission supposedly to protect all the pilgrims going to the Holy Land. And, one has to wonder how they were supposed to accomplish that. But in reality, what ended up happening, first of all, you have to know that they had a charter from the church that basically said that they were a law unto themselves. They had, wherever they planted their flag, whatever they chose as their properties, those places would be basically their own territory, where the only law that they had to adhere to was from the Pope directly. And they had the right to have their own priesthood. They could forgive sins. They could, do it all themselves, basically. And that is what they ended up doing. They helped fight the Crusades. Eventually, that became sort of a lost cause, and the Europeans pulled out of that area. But the Templars continued. They had already become at that point very powerful and wealthy. And what they ended up doing with all these properties that they had all over Europe was they became little towns where they, manufactured their own goods and really didn't need a lot of stuff from anywhere else. They could basically take care of themselves if they wanted to. But they also traded, with people in their area around them. And most importantly, perhaps, they started an institution that basically was the starting point for what we consider modern banking and checking now. So they had this situation where they would, act as sort of a reserve, keeping people's gold in keeping for them to keep it safe. And what they ended up doing on top of that was they created a credit system. So this is how they ended up inadvertently, perhaps, several hundred years later, actually protecting pilgrims on the way to the Holy Land, because what would happen is, each one of their preceptories often were located in key points along these pilgrimage routes, going through Europe to the Holy Land. So what you could do if you wanted to use their system is basically you would put some money or gold on file in your account at the preceptory, Templar preceptory, which is nearest to where you are departing from. And then as you go along the route, you'll stop each night at one of their properties, and you show them this piece of paper that you would have gotten at the beginning of your trip, which had chits on it. These chits were like little coded, just little marks that would in a coded language say how much money you would put on deposit. And so at every stop along the way, you would spend from your account on credit. And then at the end, when you're through with your trip, you can, withdraw whatever money you haven't spent yet at whatever Templar preceptory you happen to be at. So it's just like going to, all the different Bank of America branches, and you can access your account from any one of them. That's basically what they were doing, and they were the first ones to do it. They were the first ones really to come up with this idea that you could represent money on a piece of paper and trade it around, and then redeem it for actual money at the end. So that was very revolutionary, and of course it enabled them to capitalize on the advantages of creating credit. So one of the interesting things that the Pope granted them was a reprieve, basically, from the normal Catholic rule against usury. So it used to be much more strict than it is now. It used to be basically, you don't charge interest at all. Well, they were exempt from that. So they were loaning out money, they were charging interest, and they were undoubtedly doing some fractional reserve lending too, which is the norm now in banking. And then that's basically loaning out more money than you actually have, in the hopes that when people pay you back, you'll receive more money and therefore be able to pay back the other people. So the idea is that as long as you have a certain amount of money or gold, real money, in reserve, then you can float around pieces of paper representing that money greatly in excess of what you actually have, as long as not everyone comes to try to cash in their checks at the same time, which usually doesn't happen. In fact, there's a mathematical formula predicting what the odds are of that happening, and that's what banks operate on. They all work on this principle where they loan out more money than they have, knowing that most people aren't going to come get it anytime soon. So anyway, they came up with this idea. This is, I think, largely how they became very wealthy, and they came to really dominate Europe. They were really one of the most powerful forces in Europe, and they had a lot of the crown heads of the countries in Europe indebted to them. And one of these guys was the King of France. And he was also, not only was he in debt to them and not very happy about that, but he was mad at them because he had filled out a application to try to join their order, and he got rejected. So he colluded, he was kind of in control of the Pope at the time, who was Clement V. And they colluded to drop these charges of blasphemy against the Templars. But these were based on rumors that were already circulating and coming from people who had been members and had left. So all these charges that you listed at the beginning of our interview of blasphemy, doing ceremonies, satanic ceremonies, basically, where they, blaspheme the name of God, spit and urinate on the cross, supposedly kissing the behind of a goat or of other members of the group. There were charges that they were having sex with each other, homosexual sex, also having sex with women, usually prostitutes, and that they were murdering the babies that were born from these orgies they were having, and that they were rendering down the fat of the babies and using the ashes from burnt offerings of these babies. So these are just some of the details of things that they were accused of doing. Also, murdering people who would confess about what was going on. There was one of the formal accusations actually was that any of the initiates who refused to do these things or who talked about it afterwards would be murdered.
Right.
So,
and these guys were known as the poor Knights of Christ.
Yeah, it's interesting because there's quite a lot of, I would say, apologetics about this group now, where people want to kind of mystify them, look up to them. There's groups that are claiming to be continuing the tradition, the secret Hermetic tradition of the Knights Templar, like the OTO. Aleister Crowley's group says that they're the Order of Oriental Templars. And so the sort of popular, trendy way of looking at the Templars these days is that all these accusations were erroneous. They were being persecuted, like witches were persecuted by Christians, and that. And then what's even weirder beyond that, because you got to wonder how people know or feel like they know that the Templars were innocent of all of these charges, but. And on top of that, people kind of project their own fantasies, I think, onto the Templars. So it seems like a lot of people have kind of associated it with New Age ideas, modern feminist ideas, and stuff that just didn't even exist back then. People just didn't think that way. And I haven't seen any evidence for this stuff. In fact, a lot of the evidence I've come up with, and my co-author also, Alexander Rivera, in our new book about Baphomet, kind of goes in the other direction. And we're not coming at this from a perspective of, Christians trying to prove that the Templars were guilty, but we're simply analyzing the historical truth about the matter. And it doesn't seem like it was all made up. And I'll tell you more about that in a minute. But I have to stop so you can get a question in. Sorry.
Oh, no, I'm loving it, Tracy. Very good. Yeah. I'm thinking, though, are you aware of Pope Benedict discovering the 600-year-old misplaced document in the Vatican Library and coming out and exonerating the Knights Templar of all these things? And now those fractions of the Templars that you were discussing are demanding back their money and property that they had from 1300s.
Yes.
The story, folks, the reason I'm bringing this into it is because the story doesn't end, right? This is not ancient history. This is not something that they dealt with in 1300 back to 1100. It is going on right now. And Pope Benedict coming forward about the Illuminati, about the Knights Templar, and then quitting and putting a Jesuit pope into power is all part of this story. So I want you folks to realize that what Tracy is talking about is not ancient history. It is right here in front of our faces, and it is continuing to this day, so that you understand why Pope Benedict suddenly left the throne and how he could just come forward with this, the 600-year-old misplaced document and start the whole rivalry again. But there was something unholy about the Templars' initiation ceremony. Is that what we're looking at?
Yeah, and in fact, I'm glad you brought that up. The Chinon parchment, when I started reading about it, I was just shocked actually at how the headline in the newspaper doesn't match what the article says. So the headline makes it look like, oh, they were exonerated. Well, no. First of all, the parchment kind of says, well, they were guilty of some things and they couldn't really prove the other charges, so they dismissed them. Well, the things that they did admit to were a lot of the blasphemous acts of spitting on the cross, which their excuse for this, by the way, is so weird. Okay, they said to the Pope in this private, trial, I guess, this little private trial they had with the Pope. They told him,
is that back in the 1300s? I'm sorry,
yes.
I just want to get our timeline.
Yeah, 700 years ago. Okay, so they're having this conversation and said, well, we were just practicing in case the Muslims caught us on the battlefield, or some enemy caught us. They might make us do these things, and so we were just practicing what might happen. And it's weird because the ceremony, as described, it doesn't have it doesn't show them resisting. It doesn't show them saying, I won't deny Christ or anything like that. No, it shows them going through with it. So what is this practicing for? I mean, was it normal procedure for the Templars to confess or to go along with someone trying to force them to deny Christ after they've been, caught on the battlefield and they're prisoners of war? Well, no, that doesn't make any sense because they had a policy where they weren't even allowed to leave the battlefield when they were outnumbered. They were supposed to fight to the death.
They couldn't take off their underwear.
I know. So now we're supposed to believe that they would just go along with, whatever their capturers wanted them to do in order to avoid torture. I mean, it doesn't make any sense. So there's that on the face of it, just the weirdness of what they admitted to, the excuses that they had. They also admitted to kissing each other on the lower back as a ceremony. And you got to wonder, I mean, they don't, as far as I can tell, they didn't even elaborate on that or give any special reason for it. And the Pope admitted in his summation of what he sort of, found them guilty of, I guess, is that was abnormal and there was something inappropriate about that. That was kind of the worst he was going to say about it. But so this is what the document says, which is not at all the way it's being promoted by the newspapers, which the newspapers say, oh, they were exonerated. Secondly, you look at the woman who found this thing. And again, it's like you said, just a very weird thing. Okay, all of a sudden, after 700 years, they find this extremely important document, which you'd think, even if it had been misplaced, shouldn't someone have known about it? People were talking about the Templars. Popes were putting out bulls and other proclamations that mentioned the Templars for hundreds of years after this. So none of them knew that this document existed, that this legal proceeding had happened? Well, apparently not. No one mentioned this document in history until it was found accidentally in the secret Vatican library. And what we found in our investigation of the Templars and Baphomet, which really intensified over the last 6 months, is that most of the material that is available to historians that really talks at all about what the Templars were supposedly up to or what Baphomet really was, most of these documents have been found accidentally in either the Vatican Library or Masonic Lodges libraries. So it's always the same story over and over again. Oops, I accidentally found this paper. Oh, look, it's really historically important. And we have several of these in the book that we talk about. I don't know what to make of any of it. I can't deny that, maybe these documents are real, but we just got to keep that in mind, that it's very peculiar how these documents are found. And I'm not sure if all of them have been, thoroughly tested for their historical authenticity to see, what materials they were made from and things like that.
Right.
So, and of course, I'm just an individual and a small publisher, and my budget for trying to research these matters has been kind of a problem, because there's times when you find that you could really solve a historical mystery if you had a few hundred or a few $1,000 available sometimes. But we did manage to get some stuff, which I'll get to in a minute. I should probably finish up with the Chinon manuscript just to make this other point too.
And I do want to say, folks that are listening, $1 goes a long way. There are thousands and thousands of you listening right now. 10,000 people listening at this moment. $1 to Tracy, that's $10,000, and that funds the operation that pushes this thing forward. And we really need to get into the practice of tipping these guests. You get more out of Tracy Twyman than you do out of the server at your restaurant. You give her $2 if you're cheap. Give her $5 if you're not. So, to tip a guest for coming on the show is a great practice. So think about it. Just $1. I know it seems silly to you, but when you see minimum input, maximum output, and put Tracy on charge here, she's with $1, you're getting all of this. So I just want you all to think about that. Tipping the guest, it's a good practice. So go to tracytwyman.com and you find all the contact information. But go ahead, Tracy.
Thank you. Yeah, I'll just get this in real quick since you mentioned that. One of the things we're facing here as we go to publication is the British Museum wants $3,000 for the rights to print these pictures, which we commissioned, by the way. They had very bad pictures on their own website, and we had to pay them to take good pictures and to picture all the sides of this one artifact instead of just one side. So we are the reason why these pictures that were formerly not available are now available to the public of these items, which I'll talk about in a minute, that have been lost to history for the last 200 years. People thought they were fake and that they didn't exist. We found them in the British Museum. The British Museum didn't even know what they had. And, we're trying to put out a book here that's going to tell people what's going on with these artifacts that have been connected to the Templars by some people. We can't even print the pictures unless we come up with $3,000. So we might be doing a Kickstarter or something. We're going to try to get some help here with this, because it is really going to cut into any profit we might have made with the book, other things that we would like to do for the research.
Yeah, and again, folks, don't force her to go to Kickstarter, because, they take 10%. Give it direct. That way it's going straight to the source. We shouldn't have to use these second sources like Kickstarter or Indiegogo. You should be, straight at the source.
Okay, that's a good point.
Yeah. But, if you got it, you got it. Yeah.
So I'll just make my final point about Chinon parchment here, which is that you might wonder, why is the Vatican going along with this? It seems like they're in on what might be a hoax to put forward this document that allegedly, if not exonerates, at least makes it look like, well, a decision was made about the Templars and they weren't really found guilty of the worst stuff. So it makes it look nicer, the whole situation with the Templars. And the reason why they're doing that can be found if you look for an interview with the lady that found it. I can't remember her name right now off the top of my head, but I'll put up a post about this in between now and when your podcast comes out, so people can see it and they can see the interview.
We'll link it in.
All right. And this lady basically makes, again, an apology for the church and says, oh, well, Pope Clement, poor Pope Clement, he was just a victim. He was being beaten up by Philip IV, and Philip was really a mean guy, and The Pope just didn't have any choice but to go along with whatever Philip wanted. So she kind of acts like, the charges against the Templars were trumped up. And she also acts like the Pope himself, was just a victim of the King of France. So I guess she's trying to make the Vatican look better. But I think that actually makes them look worse
He's
because
supposed to be
they
like
are.
emperor of the world here.
Exactly. And, so they would participate in supposedly, wrongly persecuting people and accusing them of witchcraft because another, some king in Europe has more power than them. Well, I mean, again, of course, the history of the Vatican and the church is so interesting. So I guess, even they have to admit that, it hasn't always been good times. But that is, I think, part of the motivation here. Not that they don't want to apologize to the Templars, and they don't want to admit it was true either. They don't want to admit the charges might have been true. So they just kind of have to put something out to explain what happened in history. But I don't think it fully explains it. I don't believe it, frankly. I'm just going to say, and I could be wrong, but I don't think the Chinon parchment is true. I think it's fake. That's just because I think it's too convenient. And, maybe I'm wrong. Even if I'm wrong, it doesn't prove anything. It just proves that this is the way the Vatican or the church chose to handle this situation at the time, which reminds me of kind of during the Bush years, how they would handle terrorist attacks at home, because every time something happened where, someone bombed or opened fire on Americans and they said it was, motivated by Islam or, wanting to free the Palestinians or anything like that, Bush would always act like it wasn't a terrorist attack. His whole administration would sort of sweep it under the rug, and you'd think, well, they have a motivation to trump up terrorism, but they don't want to trump it up at home.
All right, well, let's get deep into this book then, Tracy. You have a new book coming out next month, and it is known as Baphomet, the Temple Mystery Unveiled. And you have gone forth and sought out these artifacts. I want to know more. I want to unveil this temple mystery for us, Tracy.
Okay, well, as your listeners may recall, I talked about Baphomet last time I was on too, and that was because I was involved in some Ouija board seances for years where I was contacted by Baphomet. I didn't ask for him; he came to me, and I got to know this character, what I think was the spirit of Baphomet, really well, and that's sort of how I became obsessed with this subject. So I've been researching historically the subject of Baphomet for probably 7 or 8 years now, trying to write a book about it. And I got just sort of overwhelmed with the subject. It's just too complicated, really. And I needed another brain to help me. So I finally last year got a hold of Alex Rivera, who does a blog called the Aeon Eye. And he writes all about Gnosticism and things like that. And he ended up helping me complete this book. And one of the things, you talked about the artifacts, one of the things we just had to research ourselves in order to get to the truth of Baphomet. The whole thing really starts in the 1800s, early 1800s. I mean, there had been some sort of speculations about the name of Baphomet and what it meant, because the Templars had mentioned it during their confessions when they were being prosecuted for these charges of blasphemy. So they said to the people questioning them, yes, we did these rituals to this severed head named Baphomet. And so for, several hundred years, every now and then some historian would write something about that and wondering what Baphomet was, what it meant. And then finally, someone actually wrote a lengthy essay about it. It was this guy named Joseph von Hammer-Purgstall, and he was an Orientalist. So he was one of the Europeans that liked to research and write about Middle Eastern subjects. Usually that's what that meant. So anyway, he was this Orientalist. He wrote lots of books about other subjects. Like he wrote one of the first histories, I would say, of the assassins. It was called The History of the Assassins, and people still refer to this book to this day when they want to write about the assassins. So he was very, well respected. No one really thought he was a kook at the time. But after this book came out, or it was actually just an essay within a larger book called Treasures of the Orient. And a lot of people questioned the veracity of the chapter that was about Baphomet. It was called The Mystery of Baphomet Revealed, or actually the whole thing was written in Latin because back then a lot of sort of scholarly work was written in Latin. All the scholars, everyone learned Latin when they were in school. It was normal. And so when they're writing papers that other scholars would read, a lot of times they would write in Latin. And that's how this thing got written in Latin, and this is also the reason why it really hasn't gotten read very much since its publication. I would say at least in the last 100 years, if not the last 150 years, people have written about this book, they've referred to it, but they've not read it, I don't think, most people, because most people don't know Latin anymore. But at the time it was received kind of with a little bit of incredulity. So some people thought it was, revolutionary and bringing forth revolutionary information, and then some people really questioned it. What it really was about was, okay, this guy said he had found a bunch of artifacts on churches that were on properties that formerly belonged to the Templars. So this was a bunch of different things found in different areas. A lot of them were churches in Austria, or what is now the Czech Republic, Germany. And then there's a couple of them in France. In fact, the ones that we found in Britain, in the British Museum, were originally found in churches in France. But anyway, so he found these artifacts, and in his book, he analyzed them and reproduced line drawings of them. And they show all sorts of weird things. For one thing, they show a lot of, he says some of these things were statues. So there were idols that he says were the Baphomet idol. Now, the Templars' confessions describe it as a head, but, after Purgstall's book, the concept of Baphomet kind of got expanded, and this occultist named Eliphas Levi made a drawing that almost everyone has seen now, where he looks like the devil, where it says it's supposedly Baphomet, but instead of being a head, it's a human body with a goat head, and it's got male genitals and female breasts.
And of course,
so
they just put one of those up in Detroit for children to sit on the lap of.
Yeah, it's a very popular image. I mean, it's basically become the image of the devil now. And it's because one of Eliphas Levi's friends did a tarot deck where he put the same image in as the devil.
And of course, just to clear a few things up, Crowley thought he was Levi reincarnated.
That's true. And yeah, he called himself Baphomet too. And all of the OTO stuff, all the rituals that he wrote, a lot of it has to do with Baphomet.
So to clear it up for the listeners, I just want to make this clear. What was the year of Levi's goat-headed Baphomet, going back to the Templars' practice of 10,000 or 1,099, I think was about the year that they were formed, 1,100 folks. So when was Levi's Baphomet created?
So Levi did his Baphomet in 1850, and he wrote about Baphomet. I say Baphomet with a hard T, just it's a little bit easier, and a lot of people say that, it's more common.
I have a French mom.
The French probably would have said Baphomet, yeah. But anyway, so he wrote this book, and he had a picture of it that he made that became iconographic, that everyone's seen now, and he described what he thought Baphomet meant.
And this was 800 years after the Templars, folks, because everybody thinks that Levi's Baphomet is the original Baphomet. And I've always, like you, known that the Knights Templar originally said it was a severed head of even St. John. So this is what we were trying to clear up, really. This is part of the historical mystery of it, is how did that become this? So, how did a story about a severed head
become an image of a goat-headed demon. And it really goes back to this book by Hammer Purgstall. Even Levi himself refers to it. He talks about monuments of recent discovery prove this and that about Baphomet. Well, the monuments he's talking about are Hammer Purgstall's monuments. So his Hammer Purgstall's book came out in 1818. 30 years later, Eliphas Levi's book came out. So it's right in the same general period. You know, he would have easily been influenced by Hammer Purgstall's work. And you can tell that he was, because basically, when you look at some of the drawings from Purgstall's book, you can see how they influenced Levi's mind. So there were idols that had the creatures that, you know, they looked like they had goat heads, horns. They were bearded, but with breasts. So you have those elements that ended up in Levi's drawing were on these artifacts. And you have also ceremonies going on where people are kissing snakes, a lot of naked people kissing the buttocks of one of the statues with the goat head. So that goes right along with, you know, the accusations against the Templars doing this obscene kiss, osculum inflamme, as it's called in Latin,
which Miley Cyrus did on stage.
Oh, I didn't happen to see that, but you know, of course,
and it was perfectly rehearsed, folks. When Miley Cyrus went on stage, she had a lady standing in front of her, and you're like, "Why is this lady just standing here?" And she bends over, and Miley comes up and plants a big kiss on her anus, and you know, we're watching these same rituals in our high profile rituals going on in music awards. Just wanted to make that. You know, I want you guys to know this all relates to today. We may be talking about 1800 wizards and, you know, 800-year-old knights, but yet here it is constantly right in your front door. So, yeah.
So, yeah, some of the things that are in these images are really amazing. And actually, I was quite surprised, too. What we ended up having to do to understand all this stuff was, first of all, we had to have it translated. And actually, before that, we had to track down the book itself. You can find it on Google Books, but untranslated. But they have messed up the pictures, basically. They're all on fold-out pages, but whoever scanned it into Google Books didn't fold the pages out. So you can't really see the pictures. And so I had a friend, Philip Gonzalez, actually helped track down a copy of this thing. And we managed to get some nice high quality scans of the images. And then we hired someone to translate the Latin, which was not easy, by the way, because for one thing, it was written 200 years ago. For another, the author himself didn't even really have a good command of Latin. So it was really difficult trying to figure out what he was trying to say. But we got there. And one of the things that shocked me really was how dirty it all was. First of all, the pictures themselves, they're already pretty dirty. And then Hammer Purgstall's interpretation of them was just unbelievable to me. It was just amazingly dirty. But I can't really reject what he's saying necessarily. Some of his conclusions I'm not sure about. What he sees in the picture is a little different than what I see. But of course, he's showing you line drawings of images that he actually saw, physically. So anyway, you're still there, right? We haven't dropped.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, this is intriguing.
This is the good part. Okay. The images are so much about bestiality and pedophilia. And I couldn't believe it. I mean, of course, the Templars were accused of all this stuff, but still I was surprised that this book that obviously had so much influence on what people think about Baphomet was claiming that this is what the images show and this is what the Templars were doing. And that's what his book is all about. It's interpreting the images and then extrapolating from there what he thinks their rituals were and their beliefs. And so he traces it all back to this sect of Gnostics called Ophites. Do you think your audience knows who Gnostics are?
Yeah, that's we've covered that quite a bit.
Okay. All right. So Ophites, this is one of those sects, and it was one of the sects that were accused very heavily by the church fathers of doing these kind of sex rituals, orgies, and uh, slaughtering children that are born from the orgies, doing sacrifices and things like that. And I guess if your audience knows all about Gnosticism, you know that at the very least you could definitely say that most of the Gnostic doctrines are kind of antithetical to Judeo-Christianity. Turning it on its head. The creator God is bad, and then there's some other God out there somewhere that's good. That's somehow higher or beyond the world that we're in. Well, so and this is all before really Satanism was invented. And in fact, it seems like Satanism came out of Gnosticism. Gnosticism was a belief system still reaching for what they thought was good and trying to define what they thought was good. And in the process, they reverse the value system of Judaism and Christianity. But so it developed later into Satanism, which is openly praising evil instead of trying to somehow come up with a philosophy where God is bad. You just say, well, I choose to desecrate God and exalt the devil. So and this is part of actually why our book is so huge. It's about 600 pages probably once you actually lay it out. And I think it's because in the process of trying to figure out where Baphomet came from, we ended up really tracing the origins of all of these satanic doctrines and occult beliefs back to Gnosticism, which, of course, my co-author is a total expert on, way more than I could ever be. But
we can't
anyway,
escape the influence of the Theosophical Society. You just can't.
The Theosophical, you mean like
Madame Blavatsky
or
and Bailey and the Lucifer Trust, and the Theosophy keeps bubbling up every time I'm looking in a certain direction or any direction. When whether it's MK Ultra or deeper programming, it's just, and they are the 1800s version of the ancient Gnostics, or at least that's where they want to be. As we were saying, the OTO are claiming to be representatives of the Knights Templar, the Theosophical Society, which like L. Frank Baum of Wizard of Oz, or Elvis, these people were members, or Hitler, were practitioners or believers in this Theosophical Society. And it just keeps coming up, and it's just the modern version of Gnosticism again.
Mm-hmm.
And I didn't mean to sidetrack. Sorry. Let's stick with it.
No, it's fine. No, it's interesting. This is one of the problems, too, that we came up, and we really had to deal with this in the writing of the book. So many things can be represented as Gnosticism. I mean, you can read something like Thunder Perfect Mind, which is this kind of just really beautiful, mystical poem that describes the goddess, Sophia, in Gnosticism, and it describes her as this sort of union of all opposites, basically. It's just a lovely poem. And there's so many kind of nice, uplifting, cosmic, stirring scriptures that you can read that are Gnostic. And then at the same time, you have these descriptions of what the Gnostic sects were involved in. And so much of it is blasphemous rituals and involving what we today would call sex crimes. I don't know what the laws on the books were back then about having sex with children. It's obviously a little bit different. But I think, these things were still considered abominations back then. It's interesting, though, the way the accusations are given. It's like the fact that they're raping children is kind of considered less abominable than, saying mean things about God.
Right.
That's worse in the opinions of the church fathers than raping children. But
all right.
Anyway, yeah.
So we have this Knights Templar force. They're practicing what seem to be Gnostic practices that eventually lead to satanic characters such as Baphomet. But originally we had this severed head, and you guys are trying to suss out this conundrum of the Templars' concept of Baphomet to the satanic version that we deal with now. So what did you find?
Well, couple things. Okay, first of all, the name itself. let's talk about that. There are several different ways of interpreting the name. But interestingly, almost all of the ways of approaching it, and they're all totally different ways of approaching it, by the way. There's people who decode it. There's people who look at the etymology. There's people who think it's some kind of acronym. All of these interpretations, though, all point to the same kind of thing. So they all say in one way or another something about wisdom, divine wisdom, hidden wisdom. And the most common is the one that Hammer Purgstall came up with, which I think is probably the best, which is baptism of wisdom. And so he was saying that was their main ritual. This ritual that's being described with all, the butt kissing and the orgies. Well, all of this was part of a rite that he thinks was called the baptism of wisdom. And that by going through these processes, you're actually somehow, you're not uniting yourself with the real God, not the demiurge. And somehow you are reversing the cosmic order and taking power away from the demiurge, and and also freeing yourself kind of karmically so that you can escape this realm when you die instead of being reborn. And all of this is sort of decoded from the pictures that Hammer Purgstall has here, his interpretations, and then also you look at Gnostic writings and also Gnostic artifacts that depict some of the rituals they would be involved in. It all kind of matches up. So I do think that the Templars were very much influenced by Gnostic heresies, and that this is part of what they were doing. Hammer Purgstall was saying he has these very specific terms for some of this stuff. Some of this stuff came from inscriptions that are on the artifacts themselves. And these inscriptions were weird. They would be written in Arabic letters sometimes, but the words themselves were Greek. And then sometimes even within that, the letters would be transposed so that you would have to decode them before you could figure out what the message meant. But so one of the inscriptions he found said, what was it? The distinguished charity of meat uproots the enemy. Now he's saying meat, which you find this name on several of the artifacts, M-E-T-E, that is the name for Baphomet. And that usually on these artifacts, it's depicted as a woman pretty much, but she's got a beard, at least in some of the pictures. And she looks a lot like the goddess Cybele because she's got towers on her crown. There's these pictures of meat, and she's like naked, and she's got chains in each one of her hands, and the chains are connected to the sky. And when you go up and look at the top of where the chains are connected to, they're either going up to the sky, or in one of the pictures, they're actually connected to the sun and the moon. And there's faces on the sun and the moon, and they're inverted. So it looks like basically she's taking these chains and pulling the sun and the moon down from the sky. And so what I think that means is uprooting the heavens, basically, uprooting the cosmic order, which the Gnostics were against. They thought that the planets had influence on our fate, and the planets were agents of the demiurge, the archons. So part of their goal in the rituals they were doing was to somehow escape the influence of the archons. And really the reason why they were doing these blasphemous rites was because they felt like that took power away from the archons. So what this inscription says on the artifacts found by Hammer Purgstall is that this ritual, which he says also a term, he says the distinguished charity of meat is a term used by the Templars to refer to specifically pederasty. So having sex with children, the distinguished charity of meat uproots the enemy, and the enemy is the demiurge. So it's giving me chills now when I think about it, because it really is a new interpretation of what they were doing. And it sort of makes more sense now, how they could have gotten intelligent men to go along with this stuff. Because you think, how could there be so many sick people in the upper echelons of power? And the same thing is happening today. We still have pedophile groups that perform rituals with children, and they're almost always rich people with power that are involved in these groups, and you kind of wonder why do they get along? Why do they go along with this? How do they get involved? It's because there's a ideology behind it that makes sense to those people at the time. It may not make sense to us, but you just got to understand how a cult works and how you get sucked in to the cult. You start believing one thing after another that they tell you, and then all of a sudden you've taken in their ideology, and maybe you believe something like that. I have to kill children in order to free myself from the demiurge. So that's kind of what I think was going on, basically.
Yeah, I can see that, and I can see that it is still carrying on today. A lot of the practices inside of the Ordo Templi Orientis speak of the same thing, this idea of bringing yourself down to the most base level, eating feces and things that are supposed to enlighten you. Or in the Church of Satan, they have the same practices, and the idea that you are in a prison planet, that you will return and continue in your soul is in perpetual servitude unless you can do these practices, unless you are able to break free. And I think that has some of the level to it, is their concepts of reincarnation and the return, right?
Yes, exactly. So yeah, it might sound a lot like Zen Buddhism, which is a more modern modern thing, really. But these sort of ideas have been around for quite a long time. Actually, this whole idea of the baptism of wisdom, we found traces of that far removed from all this stuff about child sacrifice and having sex with children and stuff, that you can find a reference to it actually in the Corpus Hermeticum. So in the fourth discourse in the Corpus Hermeticum, Hermes is talking to his student, and he tells him that the father of all, not the demiurge, but the father of all, didn't give wisdom to everyone that is alive. Instead, what he did was he put it in a bowl, and then he brought the bowl down from heaven. And then he invited everyone to immerse themselves in the bowl of wisdom if they feel like they have a strong enough constitution to withstand it. And it kind of says, like, if you think that you can go through this without being dissolved and pulled apart, and if you think that by going through this you will understand your reason for existing, then go ahead and immerse yourself in the wisdom. And then his student, actually it's his student and his son, his name is Tat. Tat says, "Father, I too wish to be immersed." So, and then he continues to expound all of his wisdom to his student Tat in the next several discourses. So it's implied that the wisdom, it's a bowl of wisdom. It's described as like a fluid inside of a vessel, but it's also the words of wisdom, of not Hermetic wisdom, which is kind of separate from Gnosticism, but they did end up fusing together sort of later on in late antiquity. But anyway, so the term baptism of wisdom really seems to go back to the Hermetic discourses. But there's nothing about any of these blasphemous rituals in that book. And really, the Hermetic, the Corpus Hermeticum, all that stuff is really kind of way different than a lot of the Gnostic texts. You're just not. It's not as anti-creation. They talk about a demiurge, which is actually a Platonic idea, that there's a higher God than the God that created this particular world we're in. But they don't talk about the demiurge as being bad necessarily. Or, sometimes they're kind of like down on him, like, oh, don't get stuck on creation and the world that we're in. It's not the highest thing. But they're not just dumping on him and saying he's, this horrible God that's mistreating us all. So it's a totally different mindset, Hermeticism. And it seems like it influenced, but then was, at the same time very different from Gnosticism. And Gnosticism, a lot of, again, it's like a broad category, but a lot of it seems very anti-God. And so I think it's sort of when the concept merged with Gnosticism, it took a turn where it became anti-God, anti-Judaism, maybe anti-Christian. And I think the Templars kind of picked up on it in that vein. And I think they really influenced it from there. So the reason why it really became Satanism later, I think, had a lot to do with the influence of the Templars, actually. Because it seems like from that point onward, after they were suppressed, and then not all the Templars were burnt at the stake, which is what a lot of people think. Just a few of them actually were executed, and most of them just, went on to join other orders. They went somewhere else. So I think that's kind of how the tradition was able to continue on after the Templars were suppressed. And I think those Templars that weren't executed, they just went on and spread it to other groups,
sure,
other people.
Went and joined the Freemasons,
Exactly. Well, yes, it influenced Freemasonry, which is also not satanic, I wouldn't say. But a lot of the occultists who did have a more of a satanic bent to them, in terms of actually praising the evil principle. A lot of those guys did come out of Freemasonry. A lot of them were Masons, and then they created their own orders to do rituals.
Right, exactly.
So, yeah. Crowley, obviously, is one example of that. And then you also have a lot of these early occultists, like Levi, being influenced by the church. And I think it's actually the church, the people that were practicing occultism in secret within the church, that gave it its really satanic flavor, because they were there in the church. They couldn't help but think of it as satanic as they were doing it. And in order to reconcile themselves and make themselves feel better about what they were doing, they had to fully embrace that. And in fact, what you see with the so-called Black Mass, which is, it can only be properly performed by an ordained priest of the Catholic Church.
That's right.
The Black Mass is almost identical to what the Templars were doing. So you're reversing the meaning of the regular Mass. Oftentimes it does involve that obscene kiss that I was talking about on the buttocks. They sometimes use goat imagery, and always involving desecrating the host. Even the idea that the idea basically is that because the priest is ordained and has that power of St. Peter within him, even though he's now a practicing Satanist as well, he can still do the Mass and still get get God into the wafer, and actually have the holy presence there in the host. So, then what they would do in Black Masses, and there were several priests that actually confessed to doing this, is once they had the power of God in that wafer, they would either abuse it just for the pleasure of doing that to to make Satan happy, basically. They would say nasty things to God while he was there in the wafer, and stick it inside someone's vagina or do something gross like that. And then also there was the belief, James Fraser writes about this in The Golden Bough. There's the belief that some people had that even a Satanist priest could make God do whatever he wanted to once he had him inside that wafer. So that you could actually, do very high magic and transform reality around you because you had God under your control at that moment. So I guess the reason why I got into the Black Mass was just to say that I think it's very similar to what the Templars were doing. I think that the Templars' ritual actually influenced that. So the priests that were doing Black Masses later on in European history were influenced by memories and rumors of what the Templars had been doing. Also, the witches' Sabbat, as described by confessing witches in European history, is almost identical as well. It has the same elements, including the goat god and the butt kissing and all of that. So all these guys are doing the same ritual, but I think it was really the Templars and the rumors about what the Templars were doing that kind of solidified what the ritual is to conjure Satan and to make a pact with him. And so then, the witches picked it up from there, and they didn't consider themselves Satanists necessarily, but I think over time their rituals took on more of a flavor of actual Satanism. And then, I think that the Satanists operating in the Catholic Church were influenced by that also.
Well, folks,
so really, I'm saying the Templars were really influential in the development of Satanism.
I've never heard it that way. And folks, realize that we are all about to participate in a baptism of wisdom as they force this debased nature upon humanity through all these signs and symbols and media mockeries that we're constantly being influenced by. We are being bathed in blood, folks, and our minds are being brought into this debased character, and it's forming this prison planet that we are going to have to live in. So, Tracy, it sounds like you have a few last words for these listeners. I just want to say to them that support Tracy so that she can get this information out, so that we can start to understand why they do what they do, and try to understand, the motivations and the program, so that we can get more knowledge, folks. That's what we need to really get through this whole situation, because it's getting so insane, and yet there is this unified story that keeps going through, and Tracy Twyman is bringing it out through the histories of the Templar and the understanding of who is Baphomet. So, final words, Tracy, before we head on over to the members section?
I just wanted to say, go ahead and go to tracytwyman.com. Not only by the time you hear this will there probably be information about how to pre-order the book, but also you'll find an article that I just put out that's all about the artifacts that we found at the British Museum, the ones that weren't supposed to actually exist, and the meanings of those pictures, like I was describing. Check it out. It's called, The Templar Artifacts of Hammer Purgstall. It's all right there.
Fantastic. And of course, that'll be linked right here on freemantv.com under Tracy's audio podcast. So come on over to freemantv.com. If you're not subscribed yet, do so. It's going to help everyone, and we'll make a bigger, better. And welcome back, members. Thank you for being here, and thank you for tuning in every week. We're going to carry on with this discussion, and we're looking into Baphomet. We're looking into this strange mystery of planet Earth that started with apparently a severed head and grew to be this hermaphroditic goat-headed beast that now stands in the streets of Detroit for children to sit in its lap. But this concept of the Baphomet, communication with the dead or interdimensional beings or demons, is something that has not started with the Knights Templar. So what predates the Baphomet of the Templars, Tracy?
Well, first of all, I didn't think until writing this book that the word Baphomet had any origin prior to the Templars. I figured it was a word that they had come up with, but maybe for an older concept, right? Well, but then I ran into this reference actually in a book by Freemason Albert Mackey. I think it was in his Encyclopedia of Freemasonry. And he talked about a book that he found, again, in the library of a Masonic lodge, of course. And, of course, he says, well, it's not easy to find this book now. But actually, you can find this one, okay? Ancient Alphabets and Hieroglyphic Characters Explained by Ibn Washia. And in that book, there's a reference to another book that's totally lost to history. But according to Ancient Alphabets, this book was called Sun of Suns and Moon of Moons, and in it has references to several different entities, but one of them was called Baphomet, Bafumed. It's the same word, obviously, and it says that it depicted him as like a beetle-like creature with a human head, but it says what he is, which is, quote, the secrets of the nature of the world, or the secret of secrets. And this is interesting because this is what I found in so many Masonic books that talk about Baphomet. Like Albert Pike's book, Morals and Dogma, is a Masonic catechism, basically. And it talks about Baphomet using almost the same terminology that Eliphas Levi did.
Well, Pike,
and so they're all...
Pike
Go ahead.
was a huge admirer of Levi. Everybody should
Yes.
recognize this. Okay, Albert Pike, war criminal whose statue still stands in Washington, D.C., also known for doing deep, dark rituals out in the woods and, sexual rites, all of these things. Albert Pike codified the rituals of Freemasonry in the book called Morals and Dogma, and basically formulated the Scottish Rite. So in Freemasonry, there was always the York Rite, and that was just 3 degrees from entered apprentice to Master Mason, and
Well,
and
can
then Pike
can I
came
just
along.
step in here?
Yeah, please do.
Just a minor correction. Those
Sure.
are the Blue Lodge degrees. And after you complete the Blue Lodge degrees, the first 3, then you can go on to either the York Rite or the Scottish Rite. So they're 2 separate
You are correct.
lines. Anyway, go ahead.
Right. Thank you for that. That is correct. Yeah. So this idea, everybody in the lodge is a master mason. So when people talk about higher masons and such, it's a bizarre story. But because it was this man, Albert Pike, who came in and codified these rites and rituals, he's the one who also spoke about Lucifer, Lightbringer, what a strange name to give to a dark god, and quotes like that. But he was an avid follower of a life as Levi, and most of the time when you're reading the Supreme Council of the 33rd's explanations of Albert Pike's writings in Morals and Dogma, they so often go, well, he really liked Levi, I don't know what he meant here. There's a lot of that in the glossary to Morals and Dogma as they try to explain what Pike was trying to say.
Well, it's probably because they don't know. Because honestly, yes, there are. Well, I'll say this. Okay, of the high Western occult writers and magicians that have existed, in the last 300 or 400 years since Freemasonry began, most of them were Freemasons. Okay, so they were influenced by Freemasonry. They saw in Freemasonry something that they wanted. They thought it was a system of mystical teachings akin to or connected to all the other occult teachings that they were studying and practices that they were practicing. But if you go and just find your average Freemason, and this has been true since the beginning, most of them don't know any of these things and they're not interested. So, and even ones that write books about Freemasons, it's amazing. So I'm not surprised that you'd have someone commenting on a book by Albert Pike who acts like he doesn't know what the guy's talking about, and as though his opinions matters somehow. Like, well, I'm a Freemason and I don't know what it means. Well, you just don't know. Okay, Albert Pike knew and you didn't.
Yeah, but
that's
just to be clear,
to
this was the council of the Supreme Council that was saying this. Just to be clear, it wasn't just some random Mason saying, I didn't understand. These are the guys in charge. So I'm just laughing at the fact that, the guys in charge don't know what they're all about. And so, yeah, carry on.
No, it's true. It's true. I find it so frustrating, too, because, I have friends who are Freemasons, and a lot of people that are my fans are Freemasons, and I get letters from them. And then I'll also get the nasty letters from Masons saying same sort of thing. Well, I'm a Mason, and it's not really anything about this. I would know because I'm a Mason. And, it's like your average Catholic doesn't know much about, the history of the Bible and how it came to be, and doesn't know the meanings and interpretations of all the things in it. So, just saying that you're a Catholic doesn't mean you know any of that stuff. And it's the same thing about Freemasons, even the leaders. And I think I would agree with you, like the degrees of Freemasonry, those are it's a list of rituals. It's not like you actually are going higher and higher up something.
No,
so
yeah.
it's just you take the degree by going through the ritual. It's not like you accomplish anything. You're
Right.
just following a script. So
You're just
I
being
don't think
traumatized in the situation.
I don't think that the higher degree members are necessarily any more enlightened than a lower degree member,
Well,
especially,
Pike
Yeah,
told
go
him
ahead.
that as well. He says so in the book. He says, yeah, these are not the truths here. I'm telling you, these are all fabrications, lies led to deceive you. Only the brother that seeks the knowledge will get the knowledge. I mean, he admits that it's all false until you go and seek it yourself. But I didn't want to get us too sidetracked. We were going to predate the Baphomet and the concept of this communication with the dead, or however you want to.
Yeah, so I went into that side note just to say that yes, it appears that the concept of Baphomet did exist prior to the Templars as a Arabic demon in Arabic magic.
Okay, now there again, I want to throw in a little history for the folks. The Templars and the Hashashim, the assassins, they were conjoined, and a lot of the magical practices that the Templars picked up was through the assassins.
Could have been. I mean, we looked really hard to find actual evidence of them hanging out together.
Yeah.
Well, and there was definitely they had to make treaties with each other and stuff. There was talking going on between them. We really couldn't pin down whether they were actually, hanging out as buddies with the assassins. It seems like they, but we don't know. But we did find a lot of sort of circumstantial evidence because the assassins were basically Gnostics also, and very influenced by both Gnosticism and Hermeticism. There's a whole chapter in the book that's all about Hermes and how he's actually a prophet to Muslims, and all of the influence that Hermetic philosophy has had on Islam and on Gnostic heresies spinning off from Islam, and how these heresies might have influenced the Templars. But another, and also in that chapter, we talk about how a lot of the Arabic magic books that were written, I would say, in late antiquity and early medieval era, a lot of these books would claim to have been influenced by the teachings of Hermes. In fact, there's some that are attributed to Hermes himself. So anyway,
so now we're taking it back to Egypt, just right?
Well, sort of, yeah, that too. But anyway, you were just asking about the concept of talking to a severed head. That also is an ancient concept, and they actually talk about it in the Bible, but you wouldn't know it because they use a very specific term and they don't explain what it means. But a couple times they use this term called teraphim, and what a teraph is a severed head of a baby that has been embalmed, and then you write magical words on the tongue of the severed head. You mount it on a plaque, and then you can put it on the wall or on an altar and do a little ritual, and it starts talking to you, and it'll prophecy for you and give you, whatever information you want. So this is something that people have been doing in the Middle East for a long time before the Templars. And in fact, that's a side issue, but some of these Hermetic magic books actually talk about it too. Anyway, so this is what I think this Baphomet head was for them. They were doing the same thing, and it's interesting that there's rumors connecting it to the severed head of John the Baptist. People say, oh, they might have found John's head and been using that for magical purposes.
I was just about to ask you about that.
Which is, again, we couldn't exactly pin it down, but it does seem like they were involved in the trading of what do you call those things?
Religious,
relics.
Yeah.
Trading relics. And there's like 3 or 4 different John the Baptist heads on display in different places around the world. And it seems like they may have been involved in the trade with 2 of them at least. So it's certainly possible that they had, something they considered the head of John the Baptist. And what I find interesting when you look at John's story is that his head was put on a platter by Salome's mother, Herodias. Or no, Salome, I'm trying to remember. Salome is the dancer. Herodias is the mother, right? Yeah. Okay, so the mother, Herodias, she asked for John's head on a platter. And her daughter, connives and was able to get Herod the king to have John executed, and puts the head on the platter and gives it to her. And then it doesn't say why she wanted that. I mean, we know that that Herodias was angry about something he had said about her marriage to Herod, because it was against rabbinical law, basically, or against the law that they had there, the Jewish law. But But there's more to the story, it seems to me. And when you look at the family of Herod, they actually come from Edomite blood, and they were force converted to Judaism. But they were from this family that practiced, paganism basically and magic. So how hard is it to believe that Herodias, the reason why she wanted the head was to turn it into a teraph? And there was a belief, and this goes back to Egyptian magic, and I'm sure that the Jews knew about it too, is this idea that the head of a prophet or a seer can be used, has specific power and can be used in particular as a teraph after they're dead. So that you could actually kind of trap the spirit of the prophet in the head, and then it's under your control. So maybe the Templars thought that they were doing that. Maybe they thought that they had John's spirit under their control also.
Well, we got this same story inside of Freemasonry, that the St. Johns are worshipped by them.
Yes.
I was going to go somewhere else with that, but carry on. I forgot.
Oh, no, it's all right. Go somewhere with it, please.
Well, I forgot what I was. I was thinking about this. Oh, the skull and bones, of course, are still used in their reflection chambers, and they still communicate with these gods or these heads as you go into really, meditate on your death after your ritual. You go in this closet if you're a Freemason with this skull, and you kind of have this communion with your own death. But then also we have the skull and bones. Now, whenever we're looking at these puzzles like the Assassins, the Templars, Skull and Bones, Freemasonry, everybody needs to realize that we're talking about magic. We're talking about, mystic practices using initiate rites that are meant to channel entities into your soul. Or into other bodies and body parts. So the Skull and Bones, of course, founded CIA and has given us numerous presidents. They also, have Geronimo's skull, and in the same way, most likely are trying to contain some sort of power using this necromancy.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, but I wonder if any of them are smart enough to try to talk to it. Because I'll bet you it'd be interesting to see what happens if you try that.
Yeah.
When we were doing seances on the Ouija board talking to Baphomet, at one point we had a human skull that one of my friends had loaned us. And we had forgotten about it, actually. It was sitting there in the room, but we totally had forgotten about it. And Baphomet pointed that out to us, that there's a skull right there, because we were asking what he was. Are you a goat head or what? And he pointed to the skull and then spelled out the word head. And we asked, whose head are you? Or, whose head was the idol made from? And he said, John. And then we even asked, where is John's head now? And he said, Istanbul, which is in fact where one of the alleged heads of John the Baptist is. It's on display there right now. And it's in the same city as the Church of the Holy Wisdom, the Church of Sophia. I don't know how to pronounce the first part. I always get it wrong. Whenever I'm on a show, I always pronounce it wrong. And then I look it up and I remember again. And anyway. Anyway, that's just, I guess, some evidence from the spirit world, Baphomet was telling us that he really was made from John's skull, and he really was in Istanbul. Of course, I don't know if that's true, but anyway, it was...
Well, that's why I like talking with you, Tracy, because, I research things like Crowley communicating with Horus and the weird coincidences of having the Stella of Revealing have the number 666 in the British Museum, and, the production of the Book of the Law, which then ends up housed at University of Texas, there for anyone to go and sign a bunch of paperwork and see. And now you're out there, you're doing this with the Templars, you're digging into their documents, bringing their relics and artifacts back to life. I'm so excited to talk to you about this because you got both sides. You're in there digging out the relics, and you're open to communication with this source so that we can understand what that is like as well.
Yeah, but I want to point something out for people who are about to buy my new Baphomet book, is that none of the material in there is channeled. So the only reference I make to the Ouija board seances is just to admit in the first introductory preface that, oh, this is how my obsession with this particular topic came about. But I haven't really picked up much of the information that Baphomet gave us on the Ouija board to use it in this book. It's all been from researching documents and artifacts and history and analyzing those things. So I haven't even had, it occurred to me the whole time I was writing, oh, maybe I should have a seance and ask Baphomet, for some inside information on this stuff. Maybe I could get a clue about where to go next. But actually, I never had time. I was so busy writing and researching. I just didn't allow myself to get distracted by that. So I wanted to make the point that, you're not going to read a book full of channeled material. It's all actual history. And that's what most of my writing career has been. So I only wrote one book about Ouija boards and my experience with them. But in reality, I'm a nonfiction writer and researcher, pretty straightforward in that regard. So, don't think that you're just going to get a bunch of channeled nonsense in this next book. It's exactly the opposite. In fact, I really got to say that no one has tackled this topic the way we have.
No, I bet not.
I've been writing it for 7 years, and the whole time I'm thinking someone else is going to do it. Someone else is going to scoop me. But I don't think that's possible anymore. Not only am I so close to publication, but I don't think anyone could have come up with what we've got here. It just really it took a lot of dedication, but also things fell into our laps at the right times. So it all came together. And the stuff that we have about the artifacts in the British Museum, it's great because that's like the icing on the cake here of what we already had, a really excellent book. And then just in the last couple months, I stumbled on this stuff. And to me, that just made it perfect because I've been trying to figure out if the Purgstall documents, what value they have and if these artifacts are real at all. I came to the conclusion basically that, you can't just take everything Purgstall said. You have to analyze it on your own. But a lot of it does have value. I think he was mostly onto something with his theories. And but it remains to be seen about these artifacts in the British Museum. We know that these are the things he was looking at. But what are they? Do they actually go back to the Templars? I don't know. The British Museum themselves, they have one of the artifacts is listed actually as fake. And so I wrote to them and I said, what do you mean by that? And they haven't written back. But
Purgstall, he wrote the book on Oriental. Was that? Can you give us the title again on the Purgstall?
Sure. His book was called Mysterium Baphometus Revelatum.
Oh.
And he's the one that wrote the book right before Levi, that Levi was very influenced by.
Right.
So all of the books that have been written since then about Baphomet are referencing his book, but are usually referencing other books about him. And it was after realizing that and just going in circles trying to figure out, trying to find some primary sources about this, that I realized we had to spend $1,000 and hire someone to translate it. And so that's another expense that I'm hoping to recoup here too. But anyway, that book, by the way, because the Baphomet book is so long, I didn't want to make it longer by adding Purgstall's stuff in there, Hammer Purgstall's stuff in there. So I decided we're going to publish that book on its own probably a month or so later, and it'll have footnotes and commentary from me to explain some of the things inside. But awesome. So I will be bringing to the public's availability here within a few months the first English translation of Hammer Purgstall's book about Baphomet. And then you all can decide for yourselves. I mean, even at the time it came out, there were people saying that they thought that he had been sort of hoodwinked. Because, he got these artifacts, a lot of them from this family called the Blacas family. The Duc de Blacas is actually the son of a more famous duke before him. And they were all sort of involved with the Legitimist movement in France. They were against the revolution. And, they wanted all the nobles to retain their titles and their power and their lands. And so some people think that there was a political motivation here where it was all part of a smear against the Freemasons so that they could thereby also smear the revolution. The French Revolution, of course, is very much spearheaded and driven by Freemasons and the sort of ideology behind it of, atheism, basically, and being what they call Enlightenment philosophy, which is kind of materialistic, anti-religion. There was, a movement. The Legitimist movement did bring these subjects up and portrayed the revolution as a Masonic conspiracy. So some people think that this book, Hammer Perkstall's book about Baphomet, was just all about making the Templars look bad so you could make the Freemasons look bad so you could make the French Revolution look bad. And that he was in cahoots with the Duc de Blacas and his family because they had a private collection of antiquities, which later got sold to the British Museum. And so I guess some people think that the Blacas family invented these things, that they made them up. I don't know why. It seems like a kind of far to go for the purpose of, like I said, making the Templars look bad, to make the Freemasons look bad, to make the Revolution look bad, to to invent fake artifacts that show sex orgies on them.
Even William Morgan didn't have to go that far. Yeah.
So, and then the other thing is the books that I've read that make this accusation, they kind of sound like they haven't actually read his book. So, I read it, and it's not really political. He doesn't seem to be getting at that at all. He barely mentions it. The only thing that's really political that he talks about at all is he just kind of says that the part of what was going on with the sex orgies and baby killing and all that was that once it's kind of a way of forming a mutual bond of mutually assured destruction, so that anyone who has done these things in a group with other people, not only will they never talk about what the other people did, they can't talk about what they don't want it to come out that they were involved in these things. And once you've been there and witnessed someone get murdered or raped, and you just stood by and let it happen, or maybe even participated in it, you're not going to talk about it to anyone else. So it's a way of just making the Templars into a group of criminals that all share the same secret and are therefore, loyal to each other.
But that answer seems far too simple for us, as heinous as it is.
Well, it wasn't even simple, because he was saying there were multiple layers here. So the priests and the people that came up with these rituals, they probably believed that they had spiritual effects, like we described earlier, uprooting the enemy, the demiurge. But in addition to that, they did have their own movement, basically, the Templars did, to try to take over Europe. I mean, they were already one of the most powerful groups in Europe, and the kings were afraid of them.
Without a doubt.
So, I guess what he's saying makes sense. And in fact, the same thing we find today, where there's these pedophile groups being attended by powerful men, and they, a lot of times it comes out, well, they've photographed these things secretly, and if the participants somehow go against what the group wants at a later date, they'll be blackmailed and brought back into line. And so it does seem like that's part of the motivation here.
Definitely, but not the full motivation, obviously.
I suppose, yeah. I mean,
what we're looking at here is that the strong belief in this ritual magic, to be able to perform these acts, a soul needs to believe that there is a true purpose in them, and that they are actually after something spiritual. They are trying to seek a path in the tree, if you will, through these rituals. So I'm saying that it's not simply blackmail that is going on when you have an eyes wide shut type party with children, or even worse, that there is an occult factor here that deals with a lot deeper and more bizarre reality than simple politics and the idea of blackmailing.
Absolutely. And we did find evidence beyond just Templar artifacts, these Hammer Purgstall artifacts that are questionable whether they have anything to do with the Templars or not. But we did find other things that seem a little bit more legitimate. Like, for instance, I don't know if you've seen this, but there was a seal that they actually used on some of their documents that has Abraxas on it. Have you seen that?
I have, yes.
Okay.
Describe Abraxas. That's what, like chicken head serpent? Right.
Yes, this is a. There were some Gnostic sects, such as the Basilides, that used this emblem, this creature. I guess they revered him and thought that he was, in a way, it's weird. It's like he's the demiurge to some people, it seems, and to others he's more powerful than the demiurge. He's something else. So it's kind of hard to tell. But what he was a chimera, basically. Something made from the natures of several different beings. So he has a human male torso, and he's got kind of armor on his torso, like he's dressed for battle. His legs are serpents. Each leg is a serpent. That's called an anguipede when you have serpents for legs. And then he's got a chicken head, a rooster head, and he's got a shield in one hand and a scourge in another hand for whipping. And it's described basically that's for whipping demons. It's the idea is that he scares demons away. He's so scary, even the demons are scared of him. So you would invoke him or have an amulet with him on it, just to kind of keep things pure, to keep the powers of the demons away at that particular moment. And so the Templars actually used the seal. They had a seal that has Abraxas in the middle, and around the sides of it, it says in Latin, "Secret of the Temple." So it's implied that Abraxas is the secret of the temple somehow, and the temple being the Temple of Solomon, which they were stationed on the floor of, and it named themselves after because they had some sort of spiritual reverence for the idea of Solomon's temple. So it does seem, that seems to me proof of two things. One, that they, were familiar with Gnostic doctrines, because that's a very specifically Gnostic symbol. And also it's a symbol that's associated with ritual magic. So it implies to me that they were definitely involved in ritual magic, which we kind of already know from their confessions. But those rituals weren't just sort of a hazing rite for initiation. They were supposed to have some sort of magical power, and who knows, they probably did lots of other rituals too that we haven't heard about. But definitely just that symbol alone, for one thing, it seems like they were Gnostics. For another, they were doing ritual magic. And for yet another, we have a whole chapter on this that goes on for like 50 or 60 pages, really, connecting Abraxas and Baphomet. So, they're very similar in a lot of ways, and it seems like one might be just a different version of the same thing. They're two versions of the same idea, basically, or two different ways of expressing it. So, there's that, and then there's I also should probably bring this up. We do have a little bit in the book about the idea of the temple itself, and interestingly, the information that we're writing about there again comes from an alleged document allegedly discovered in a Masonic lodge. So there's this guy that you may have heard of calling himself Prince Michael of Albany, who claims to be the rightful heir to the Scottish throne. And he's wrote a book about that. And then most recently, he wrote a book about what he calls the Islamic influence on the Templars and Freemasonry. So anyway, that's interesting in itself. And he's got a lot of interesting points in his book, some of which we analyze in our book. But anyway, he claims to have found a document that literally says that the Templars did a secret mission and went down to Mecca, and that they found the actual foundation of the Temple of Solomon there. And then, he talks about how there's no real archaeological evidence that the foundation of the Temple of Solomon was ever in Jerusalem, and that, in fact, a lot of the alleged events that supposedly happened in the Bible in Jerusalem actually probably took place somewhere else, and you can find the place names for where those events actually took place. You can find them in maps in other countries, like in the Middle East.
Well, it seems that the Alaska Mosque is playing a heavy role in this whole play that we're watching on the stage.
Oh yeah, with all the fighting and stuff going on in there right now.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Yes. Well, and it's interesting, isn't it? I mean, I wonder if one of the big secrets is that you can't find the real temple down there. So and again, I don't know. I don't have anything against Jews or Muslims, and so I don't have this fight, but I think what Prince Michael is pointing out here, I found traces of it in other places as well. So he's pointing out that there's a rumor, at least, popular with some Freemasons, that they think that their mythos basically came from what we would call heretical, kind of Gnostic-leaning Islamic sects. And in fact, they even, the Order of the Shrine, which is it's a Masonic extra group. You have to be a 32nd degree Mason to join it.
Right.
All their rituals are about being in Mecca and the Kaaba, and they basically say that their order started with Muhammad. And it's funny, they say that their order started with Muhammad and a group of 9 Islamic knights who wanted to protect the route to the Kaaba, protect pilgrims going to the Kaaba. So it's the same story as the Knights Templar, but they've transposed it on Mecca and said that the origin of their order comes from Islam. And there's nothing, it's weird. When you look at the ritual, it's like, this has nothing to do with Islam. But actually, it's very much like the Templars' rituals, because in the Order of the Shrine, when you get initiated, they tell you to kiss the black stone of Casper, which is the black stone at the Kaaba. You're pretending that you're going into the Kaaba and being initiated there. And they tell you to bend down and kiss the black stone, and you do it. And then they make fun of you afterwards. And they say, you've probably said your whole life that you ass, but look, you kissed the black stone of Casper. Shame on you. So what they're saying, they're equating the black stone at the Kaaba with an ass and kissing an ass. And that's traditionally what Muslims do when they go on pilgrimage to the Kaaba. They circle around it 3 times, just like Freemasons do in their rituals, circumambulation. And then they kiss the stone, which is in the corner of the temple there. So this is sort of a blasphemous interpretation of that ritual, saying they're really kissing an ass, which is, they're likening it Templar rituals where they kiss an ass. So it's interesting. This made me think about the fact that Eliphas Levi always shows Baphomet sitting on a cubic stone, a black cubic stone. So I got to thinking, well, maybe in the minds of the Freemasons who wrote that ritual, they're thinking that kissing the black stone is like kissing Baphomet's butt, And this whole ritual that they invented to initiate people into the Shriners Lodge is just, the Templar rituals. But they're connecting it to Mecca and Islam. Are you hearing that buzz?
Yeah, every now and again you're fading out, but we're getting
I'm sorry about that. Okay, I'm on Skype and on my phone, and so every time someone sends me a Facebook message, it's doing that.
Oh yeah, that
I'm
Facebook
sorry about
app
that.
is pervasive. Yes. I know.
but
no,
okay,
it's not doing too bad. Don't worry.
Okay, good. So just to, I guess, wrap up my point here, or maybe segue into
well, this has
another
been amazing.
topic.
I'm blown away here. I really am.
So yeah, I'm just saying that another question that I wanted to answer in this book, I don't know if we answered it fully, but we got as closer than anyone else ever has, is to explore this idea of, is it true people said that Baphomet was a corruption of the word Muhammad, and actually used to be around contemporary with the times that the Templars were being tried. The word Muhammad sort of taken in French as a word for an idol. It was just like a generic word for an idol. And it's kind of because most Europeans didn't really understand anything about Islam, and they kind of imagined it as being like paganism. So, because they had no information. So they talked about Muhammad as being an idol. And so that's why I think some people thought that the word Baphomet came from Muhammad. I don't think it did, but it's really sort of indicative, too, of the idea. People believed that they were very much influenced by some sort of Islamic heresy. And I think that there's a lot of evidence for that.
Folks, I want you to keep this clear, that here is a word, Baphomet, that has been passed around through the conspiracy movement, passed around and idolized and shown as a god. And as Tracy has done this deep, deep research, you learn that we don't even know the origin of that word. There's, as she was saying in the first hour, so many different interpretations, codings, and decipherments of what it could mean. This kind of goes along with the most secret word of a Freemason, which is Maha-Bone, which they also have no idea. And some relate Maha-Bone to Baphomet.
Could be, I can see the connection there potentially. Yeah. But yeah, I guess what was really amazing to me is in a chapter that I thought was going to be about something else, which I told you that we wrote a chapter about Hermes Trismegistus. And that's where I found out, a lot of the influences on Islamic thought and philosophy came from Hermeticism and Gnosticism. And I was really shocked at that. And that kind of opened up the subject for me because, like, years ago when people asked me, if I thought that the Templars were influenced by Islam, I said, nah, I don't think so. But now, I have a totally different view of it. And it's because I know, more about what Islam is and more about all the different strands of it and the flavors of it and the tremendous influence that Hermeticism has had on it. And like I said, it's because they actually took him to be a prophet. And there's one of the prophets, I believe, mentioned in the Quran, and also there's lots of hadiths about him, Idris. And he's absolutely the same character as Enoch in the Judeo-Christian tradition. So Idris is like or Idris, I guess is a better way of pronouncing it. He's this guy that shows up at inopportune or opportune moments when you need him the most, I guess. You don't usually recognize him when he shows up, and he comes and helps you in some way. And he gives you some kind of bizarre wisdom from beyond. Enoch has always been connected. Idris has always been thought of as being Enoch. So character in the Judeo-Christian tradition, he predicted the flood. He was the grandfather of Noah. He wrote he translated to heaven instead of dying. It just got miraculously translated like people do in the rapture, supposedly. That happened to him, and then he was able to learn all the secrets of heaven and hell directly from being on the other side. And then he wrote books about that, and supposedly, and those were given then to mankind. So Enoch, Hermes, and Idris are all the same character. And in the Islamic tradition, there's a lot of emphasis placed on this. And they even think that there's books of philosophy that are attributed to Hermes that are all like maxims that are ripped off from Aristotle and Plato, but they put Hermes' name on there. Like, they think that he's one of the highest prophets and philosophers of history, and also that he was one of the earliest kings. Ruled over Egypt and some other territory as well. It was just amazing, all of the detail I found about what was believed about Hermes, and in particular in the Islamic tradition. So these things are considered basically fables in the West now, but it's actually still very much a part of the Islamic doctrine, to people that are devoutly Muslim, particularly the Shia. I mean, the Shia sects, and there's several different, branches of it at this point, and the assassins came out of that. But a lot of these different branches are very Gnostic and Hermetic. And then there's Sufism, which is sort of a very broad category, but basically it's a strand of Islamic mysticism that is, bears little resemblance to actual Islam in some ways, it seems. And Sufism is definitely influential in Freemasonry. There's this great book you can get by Idris Shah. He named himself after the prophet I was describing. His pen name is Idris Shah, and he wrote this book about the Sufis, where he's basically crediting so many different aspects of Western culture to Sufism, including Freemasonry, including witchcraft, European witchcraft. He says basically what we think of as the tradition of European witchcraft came from this guy. I hope to pronounce his name correctly. It's like Atahia or something like that. He was a poet and a Sufi poet, and he had a sect of followers too. And he was from this tribe, this Arab tribe called the Aniza, and their sort of emblem, their family coat of arms, had a goat head with a candle in between his horns. Well, this is exactly how Eliphas Levi depicts Baphomet, and there's really no other examples of this in the world, So there's just this family coat of arms of the Aniza tribe. That this coat of arms was used by this Sufi poet, and then his followers immigrated to Spain, and there was a huge Sufi presence there in Spain, and then it influenced, he says, European witchcraft. So he thinks that this is how the goat god came to be so highly reverenced in European witchcraft rituals, and why this emblem of him with a candle in between his horns somehow came into the cognition of Eliphas Levi, and he ended up using it for Baphomet. So, I thought he had just some really good points in this book, and I think he's probably right. That for one thing, we know Hugh de Payen, one of the original 9 Templars, and really probably the main founder of the group. His family was half Muslim and very much influenced by Sufism. And he has on his family coat of arms 3 Moor heads. So if you're familiar with European heraldry, one of the things that shows up sometimes on coats of arms and flags and things like that is called a Moor's head. So it's a little black guy head. And in Spain, when the Muslims had taken over there, a lot of northern Africans were there, and they called them Moors. So, and then the word Moor kind of became a general term for a Muslim. So anyway, you see on his coat of arms these 3 Moor heads, and traditionally everyone thinks, well, that's because he was a Templar and they were out cutting off Moor heads, in battle. But actually, he came from that family too. He came from that blood. So it's really interesting to think. I wonder what side the Templars were really on and what their real motivation was. And they were chartered by the church too. So you got to wonder if maybe in the beginning the church was in on it, and maybe their intention all along was just something different than what I don't know what it was, but it could be that they and some of the priests that were in charge of Mecca, for instance. This is something Prince Michael talks about. He thinks that the Templars might have had a relationship with the secret order that was in control of the priesthood of Mecca. So it could be that they shared a secret, about the real location of Solomon's temple, and about these ancient spirits that became known by the name of Baphomet.
Wow.
I'm sorry, I interrupted you. You're going to say something.
Oh, no. This is all very fascinating. I'm blown away, and I'm thinking about how Sufism is still celebrated today at the Grateful Dead concerts. There's plenty of whirling dervishes there. They keep that alive there. Did the Ark of the Covenant come into this at all?
Well, just that, I mean, I wonder about it. I chose not to devote much space in the book to that subject. So no, we really don't talk about the Ark. But I mean, I kind of figure that the concept of whether or not there's actually a Solomon's Temple foundation in Jerusalem or not, that's kind of key, because there is no story of the Ark actually being stolen. We don't really know what happened to it. It just sort of drops out of the narrative in the Bible. And so, one of the obvious places that it could have been hiding all this time is, a lot of people have said this, sort of in the basement of the temple. Maybe they just kind of moved it and hid it away so that it wouldn't get stolen. And, people have then theorized, well, the Knights were there in Israel and they were there on the Temple Mount. Maybe they were digging underneath and they found the Ark. But if the Temple Mount wasn't even there, then the likelihood of them finding the Ark there is low. But maybe they found out where the real Temple Mount was, and therefore maybe they, found the Ark too. But I don't know. I mean, I really have no way of knowing about that subject.
Thought I'd throw it in there since it's one of the topics that comes and follows the Templars, like their great mythos. So the question really is, were the poor Knights of Christ Muslim?
That's a good... Well, it's a good question, but I think I would hesitate to call them that any more than I would call them Christians, I think they were influenced by a variety of things. And in fact, I think, one of the things that stands out about them the most. Before Freemasonry ever existed, these guys, I think, were constructing their own religion, their own belief system, based on, the whole platter of what was out there available to them. And I think they were uniquely positioned because of the families they came from, because of the secret societies that they already that were part of before they started the Templars, because of their position there on the Temple Mount, their relationships with European crown heads, their relationships potentially with the assassins, potentially with the priests at Mecca. All of these things come into play, and of course they were employing Arab scribes when they were in the Holy Land. They had to hire these guys to help them talk to the local population, and they were heavily involved, later on in their careers in trading manuscripts and having them translated. So they were. I mean, the Templars are frequently credited with helping to spread, information and wisdom, helping to basically create more of a melting pot in Europe, because they were traveling back and forth so often, between the Holy Land and all these different places in Europe. I think that they were in a unique position to be able to create, sort of have their own comparative mythology and create their own religion based on a variety of sources. I think they did do that. And then Freemasonry, which comes, is influenced by them probably, comes after that. That's the first time we see publicly that being done. And that's what Freemasonry is too. I mean, these people that write books where they try to trace Freemasonry back to one thing or another are totally missing the point. It's obviously made from a variety of things. So.
Right.
So, I think that you could not call them Muslims per se, but they would, if you got into a private conversation with one of them, they might admit that they think that they know the truth behind Islam, the truth about the Kaaba, the truth about Muhammad. And they would probably say the same thing about Judaism and Christianity. So
kissing on the ass, right?
I'm saying they're not followers. They think that they have primary resources. They are talking to Baphomet himself.
There you go.
And the origin of Baphomet's spirit, I basically think it comes back to the serpent in the Garden of Eden. And here's why. I think I talked about this a little bit last time I was on, but I'll try to give a shorter version of it here. When you look, there's a seal of Baphomet that is used by the Church of Satan now. And it wasn't actually made by Levi, but it was influenced by him because it has the goat face on it. But it's just the face. And then it has the pentagram around it. And that's actually just one side of the seal because there's another side too. So on that side, the pentagram is pointing downward. This was made by an occultist named Stanislas de Guaita or something like that. It's a little bit later than Eliphas Levi. Anyway, so this seal, on the one side, it has the goat head with the pentagram facing downward. And I think it says in Hebrew letters around the outside, it says Leviathan. Okay. And then on the reverse side of the seal, you have a picture of a man with his arms and legs spread out like the Vitruvian man. And you have a pentagram pointing upward. And then you have the names of Adam and Eve. And I think on the one with the pentagram pointing down, that's where you have the names of these two demons, Lilith and Samael, in addition to Leviathan. So you look at these seals, and they're actually telling you everything you need to know about Baphomet and where he comes from. So Lilith and Samael, this comes from the Zohar and from other Kabbalistic texts. These are the male and female halves of the serpent in Genesis. So they're saying, the rabbis said, this creature was hermaphroditic. And God split it apart, it says, because their mating was causing chaos, basically. They were creating monstrous children, demons, and the universe was going to be destroyed by this. So he severed them in half and made it so that they can't mate anymore. But, it says, they have found some way of simulating sex. And it uses something, they're using something they call the tanniniver. And it means intermediary. And this creature, it seems like it's a creature, is specifically identified in the Zohar with Azazel, which is a goat demon in the Bible. In fact, Azazel is also in the book of Enoch. Azazel is the leader of the fallen angels that convinces them all to have sex with human women and breed giants. So there again, you have the idea of breeding demons or, monstrous children, and that somehow destroys the world, because in the book of Enoch, that leads to God bringing the flood to get rid of these giants. Anyway, so you've got the idea that Samael and Lilith are, two halves of an originally hermaphroditic serpent, and that they were the ones that convinced Adam and Eve to eat the apple. And it's basically described by the rabbis that actually they were having sex with Adam and Eve and impregnated Eve, and Cain is in fact the child of this serpent demon. And then the story of Lilith, they elaborate on it more, so that she's also Adam's first wife before Eve, and that she ended up getting sort of cast out of Eden as well, and now she's in the Red Sea, and she visits humans at night. She visits men and seduces them and takes their semen, and then she breeds half demon children with them. And here's an interesting detail about Lilith. Okay, there's several characters in the Bible that the Zohar says were actually her, and so she's sort of incarnating as humans, and she plays different characters in the Bible, like the Queen of Sheba supposedly was one of these incarnations. And then there's some other characters there's another character that ended up marrying Solomon, was supposedly one of her incarnations, and a couple of others. And I explain this all in the book. It comes out that basically, if you were to believe what these rabbis are saying, you would have to believe that basically Jesus came from this bloodline, because some of his ancestors are, Lilith or children of her. And so, it's interesting. You've got this creature, this hermaphroditic creature, is the serpent. It is Satan, essentially, and it's also the father of these characters that are in the Bible. And in the Garden of Eden, God basically, gives dominion over the earth to Adam. Well, right after the Garden of Eden story. and basically, puts the serpent beneath his feet and says, your heel will crush his head. So he's giving Adam dominion over the serpent, even though the serpent, and the way it's explained, it's like the serpent felt very much slighted, that he was the firstborn son in a way from God, and God didn't give him the the honor that he deserved. Instead, he gave it to Adam. So you see with Lilith incarnating into the holy bloodline, basically, that ended up with Jesus. You see her, the serpent, actually trying to take that power back from Adam. So Adam's children are the kings holding the thrones over the earth, and she wants to put her own children there and get that power back, and that's how she does it, by breeding. So this all ties into the Templar rituals, because here they are doing these sex rituals. They're invoking demons. These demons inspire them to do all sorts of dirty things. Well, from the demons' perspective, what is their point? What is the point in asking them to do these things? Well, it goes back to this idea of the Tanniver. Okay, Lilith and Samael need an intermediary to have sex. What does that mean? It means they're incarnating in humans and using them as vessels to have sex with each other. And that's really what I think Baphomet is about. I think that the Templars must have encountered this being, and I guess this part comes from my own experience. I know what it's like talking to demons, and they will give you very detailed instructions on what you should do to do rituals for them. And so I wouldn't doubt, if some of the guys that started the Templars just a divination session. Maybe they found this head or came into possession of it somehow, started talking to it, and it told them how to construct the rituals, how to find other artifacts and relics that they could use in their rituals. And then they confessed, actually, they said that the head gave them wisdom and made them rich. And they even kept pictures of it, basically, in their coffers, in their money coffers, to sort of give power to attract money, basically, to attract wealth. But I think more than that, it's possible that this spirit that they contacted gave them instructions on how to do business, in particular the credit system, how to invent a credit system, how to do
That's got to be demonic.
I wouldn't doubt if that's what they it's something that you wouldn't necessarily think of on your own.
No.
So I wouldn't doubt if that's where they got it.
Well, so we have this straight line, King David, Queen of Sheba, connecting back to Lilith and Azael, and tying this straight into the Temple Mount, which goes to the Templars, which then boils up into Freemasonry, where they're all building Solomon's Temple. And we're talking about, this is the driving force behind most of the revolutionary movements. We see this dark magic influence that are founding nations and banking systems. So, Tracy, oh my God, thank you so much for giving us all of this. This was just, wow. I mean, I'm gonna have to go and soak this in for a while and take it all just deeper, because this puzzle is getting weird, and the belief in this fighting factions that are going to bring about the age of Lucifer, as supposedly explained by Albert Pike, this crisis of Muslim versus Christian, atheist, nihilist versus everybody, it seems to be coming to a head right now. And I think that this information you're about to bring out in your new book, which, folks, is called Baphomet, The Temple Mystery Unveiled. That's the current working title. Of course, check TracyTwyman.com to get that, and to make sure that that's still the title. Baphomet.
I think that's going to be the title.
It's a good one. Yeah. The Temple Mystery Unveiled. That'll get the people in there. Because when we start to discover that behind these revolutions, behind these transitions in mankind's understanding of reality, we keep finding people that are channeling, demons, utilizing ritual magic, then we really need to understand this stuff. And Tracy is digging deep. So definitely, kick her a buck so that she can spend those thousands of dollars to get these documents to us. I'm so impressed by that, Tracy, and I can't wait to see all of this. So lay it out there for for everyone else. If I didn't cover any information on how people can find your books and find you.
No, you pretty much explained it. TracyRTwyman.com or TracyTwyman.com will take you to my website. You can find portals to everything else. And of course, all my books are on Amazon. So just type my name in there and you'll find lots of stuff.
All right. Fantastic. And folks, of course, they're all linked right here on freemantv.com. Thank you so much for supporting this show. Your efforts are really helping, and we're progressing, and it's going to get bigger and better and bolder. I promise you this. So